Hello, hi. Welcome to the uh, eighth eighth day of our 12 days of COP28. And tonight we're going to have hopefully Collins join us in a bit, as Richard, our usual presenter, to go together with me, is tied up on some amazing Christmas dinner I believe that he's having. And this evening, we're going to be able to have sometimes talking about the Maasai community and what they can do to face climate change. And we're going to also listen to a musician, Rudini, and his life and music. But first, as always, we're going to start with Who Tipped Over the Tipping Point, the comedy show that keeps you laughing sustainably. And wait for a moment while I just get that ready and queued up, and we will be there with you in a moment. So let's see how we can do this best. Now, let's see. Okay, and here it goes. Here we come. We have this ready for us. There we go. Oh, it's still being processed. So we shall wait for a moment. And in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about what's happened today then. So as you probably heard around in the news, more and more information is coming out about the balance between carbon capture and about the aspect of what we need to do to cut our emissions. And of course, the issue is very simple. Does carbon capture actually provide us with the difference that we need? Is carbon capture a way out of our situation? Well, a number of things need to be understood in terms of carbon capture at the moment. The most basic thing about it is simply that it takes a lot of energy. So if you think about what the situation is that carbon dioxide exists as a very, very a sparse gas in our atmosphere. And some people take that to say, how can it possibly warm up so much? Well, the reason is because it's a bit like the foil you put on and when you cook some food in the oven. What it does is it prevents the heat from going out, and it doesn't need to be very thick for it to do that. In the same way as sometimes you see these emergency foil blankets that people have. So it's not the amount of it that's significant, is what it does that's really significant. And because it is actually so few of it and has such a big effect, what happens with carbon capture is it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. So imagine that you have to filter through 10,000 random little balls around, and only one of them is the carbon dioxide that you do. And to do that, clearly, you need to be swimming along in all of these and trying to find out what you can. And that takes a lot of energy. And that is why carbon capture is such a difficult thing in that way. Well, what else can you do instead if that's the case? Well, maybe there are some other things that could be possible. And this is where the most basic part is what we've always talked about, which is that the most basic part of things that we should do, the most basic part of what we should do is simply not to emit in the first place, to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And that's what we call for, the ability to do that. Okay, so enough of that for now. Let's welcome you back onto the stage with Who Tipped Over the Tipping Point. Here we are.
Who tipped you over the tipping point? The show that keeps you laughing unstuntable. Don't worry, English is not my first language. So I'm here with the very good, wonderful people here. So today we're going to play a game. Everyone's going to show a product that we think should not be in this planet, and we can discuss as we go and make some jokes as well. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to David because he's one of the directors of this show, and Richard and me and Kate were just best guests on the show.
And do with that one last one in.
No, we're not getting a last one in. I'm in the lead. We stop right now.
Yeah.
I never win anything.
It's 3 minutes to half past. It's 3 minutes to half past. 2 minutes half past. So
okay, one last one in. One last one in.
Well,
what is that?
Those air cons on a building roof.
No, I think this is my nemesis. This is a fake tree.
Exactly. I never heard it called that, but that's exactly what it is. You're really brilliant at this, aren't you?
Probably spend a bit too much time thinking about this. I need to get out more. Yes, I think this is a machine that they've built, and it's like billions of pounds of investment and thought and the best engineers to come up with a special machine that sucks carbon dioxide out of the air. And you think, oh, we've got trees. Nature does that. And not only do the trees do carbon dioxide, they also give us the oxygen that we breathe, and they have roots that hold the soil together and stop flooding, and they are home to bees and birds and insects, and these horrible old things just take a lot of energy to suck carbon dioxide out of the air that's produced when we're making energy. It hurts my head. No, I'm going to just ban these straight away.
An artificial tree. Okay.
Yes.
That's what they look like. Okay.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, this is a tiny one, I think. I think they're going to be like Neom's going to have a twin brother.
Yeah, they're going to be absolutely
if they were working on a scale that actually made any difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Neom's long lost twin brother Leon rocked up into gigantic structure, and that's the trick for us going forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not. People say now to me when I roll my eyes at these, we need to do everything. We've passed the point where we can, ditch anything. But the reality is the carbon price to get these things really working at scale needs to be so high. And if the carbon price was, $100 a ton, happy days. We could just get so much nature restoration going. It'd be so, there's so much we can do, and nature's just does so much more for us than big concrete towers. So I'd be trying to reforest half the planet before I invested in these.
It's
cannot disagree.
But then you don't get the cool engineering. You don't get those beautiful.
But that's the trouble. It's like invest. I'm sure this is, if I'd read your book, I'm sure this is what it's about. if you just want to drive tech for the sake of having something to invest in so that we can grow, you invest in this. If you just want to actually save the world at the most efficient price and do lots of other good as well, you invest in trees. And unfortunately, the whole world is geared around putting money into useless machines that do stuff that we could have done with nature.
Yeah, and what you say is really, really, really interesting. So I had this conversation with this guy, and he's been working in restoration for forever, and he's talking about restoring rainforests and stuff. And so I thought, oh, rainforest, yeah, great. It's drying out, it's dying. It's not a problem. We got this cool engineering. It's like, no, you just don't get what the rainforest does, do you? And I'm like, okay, well, tell me. And it says, you wake up in the morning when the sun comes out, and then the trees get to work. They take the water up and they go along up, and then together with going up, they also get all these little aerosol things that rise up together. So what happens is you get all the water vapor going up, and you get the seeds to get the clouds going. So that's perfect. You get the clouds forming, and it forms its own rain. I'm like, oh, that's great. That's really cool, isn't it? And it says, but the amazing thing is when it does that, imagine you're boiling the kettle. You have to pump a lot of energy into it. So when the water comes back from the water vapor into water, it gives out a lot of energy. And these clouds are way up in the sky, above where all the carbon dioxide is. So they actually send the energy back out into space. So it actually cools the planet. And
yes, but now we've got tech that can do cloud seeding for billions of dollars as well. We've got tech that can reflect the sun back by just putting some solar panels into space. So don't worry, we can cut down all the trees and spend billions and billions and billions of pounds doing all the things that they did for free. And then the economy will carry on growing, and that's what we all want.
And then I was saying exactly that. And you know, and then he said, yeah, but you know what you don't realize is when they bring the cloud, when they form the water, the volume shrinks, and so all the air comes moving in, and it creates all the wind around the offshore. So you get the renewable energy. Without them, you don't get the wind, and then you don't get your wind power. And I'm like, oh. So they go along and they create the rain, sort out the drought, cools the planet so you don't get overheated, create the wind so you get your renewable energy, and it costs you not a lot of money, a lot of money. And he says that's the problem. It doesn't actually cost you that much money, so nobody's interested in it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. This is a big thing at the moment. Everyone asks me, what can I invest in nature tech? I said, nothing. Nature shouldn't make a 10 times return, but you can invest you can put money into it because we want to live. Oh, gosh.
So can we do without?
Yeah, direct air capture. Just put your money into trees and don't expect them to give you anything back. Just enjoy the wind.
They do. Mangoes, avocado.
They will give you, I guess, a natural rate of return. That's
yes, exactly.
what we come back to. The natural rate of return, which eventually, I think all investments over really long cycles always return to the natural rate of return.
That's when the Anthropocene is over, right? You're talking about that's the long investment.
Possibly. I mean, it's a long horizon, but I plan to grow old, so that's okay.
Yes. Some of the investors I've spoken to in the nature-based solutions space, literally, their whole thesis is around, we're going to make this stuff so rare that the last tree is going to be worth a load of money. And you think, that just hurts my head. Let's get rid of all the nature so that the last bits of nature are so incredibly valuable, and I hold on to them. You think, oh no, that's just no, that's not a good plan for humanity. And that's why, again, somebody needs to step in and set some rules of the game that mean that that's not you're not incentivized to do that.
So that's the thing with Zimbabwe, right? They have this big problem with carbon credits from the forests, and basically the problem is in the forests where they were growing these trees and maintaining them, they were being measured against the forests that weren't doing that. And unfortunately, in Zimbabwe, they've stopped cutting down all the forests, and they've actually all taken on this idea that is good for us. So as a result, in comparison to the other part, everyone's growing trees, which is actually supposed to be good. But what they need is for them to have gone out and burned all the trees down, or the other trees down, because then they'd have been given lots. As a result, there's a big collapse in the market back over in the summer. Everybody said they were cheating because they weren't actually growing trees. Because other people weren't cutting down trees, so they were cheating. And so what it was worth a lot of money and should actually be worth a lot, because everybody is now doing it and keeping the trees growing, is now considered to be cheating and not to have abide by the rules. And the regulator stepped in and said that no, you can't keep being financed anymore for maintaining your forests because you didn't go out and chop all the other trees down. So there you go. The regulators came in and actually said, nope, you're not qualified to be maintaining your forests because the other people didn't cut their trees.
There you go.
Well, for me, no comment on that one.
Whole new one to start digging up next time.
No comment on my side. I just wondering what those amplifiers I was watching. The last picture showed. I thought it was amplifier. The teacher is ready.
Yeah.
Right. Points. Last points.
Anyway, I think I'll come up to we come to the end of the show for today. Anyway, it's good. So the points are my job is difficult, guys. It's like one of the toughest jobs to be in the show today because everybody's fantastic and every contributed. Yeah. For me, I'm just taking points about who put the pressure to to raise awareness as well and learning and our audience, they also want to learn more. What I'm trying to say, I'm learning more here, so someone should. Anyways, so in this round, I think was really tough, but I'm gonna go 35 for Kate. She really, the energy is so good as well, and the knowledge and experience is wonderful. So if you're watching this, we need energy people to come and watch the show as well and share your own experiences and stuff like that. That's the point of this show. We're just working together as a team. So I'm gonna go. David is wonderful because he is the one who brought up the amplifiers. I don't know what was that picture, but it's really good. So yeah,
musical speakers. That's what they are. Massive musical speakers for broadcasting to the world. You know,
so I'll give David. Yeah, I'll give David 30 points, and that Richard is the most powerful man on this show today. But and this round it was a little bit quiet. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I thought they were air cons actually first. You know, they looked like these structures you have on the rooftops, and I thought they're tiny but still air conditioned units. So yeah. I have to bow to the knowledge of Katie. You know, she nailed it immediately with her artificial trees, and yeah.
So I'll give Richard 25. Oh, and that's the end of the day, guys. We did it. It's wonderful.
Ian is still there, moving along.
Ian will give him what's called the tip of the day. 15.
So there we go.
Wow.
Oh, they were close. They were close.
This is really.
Wow, that handicap really. Oh.
Yeah. This is really nice. This is, I think it's going to be more exciting to go back and actually look at, if I have to take questions about giving the points.
Shocking. Yeah. I had my 5 seconds of fame. That's all I can say. No,
Mr. Richard, depends what time you arrived as well.
You're late. You see, you lost your point for being late.
Yeah, if we put your point back, actually will be exactly the same with David.
Yeah, I can only blame the infamous blue screen.
But for me, I'll just say thank you, everyone, and I enjoyed this as a host and as well as a tax defense. So we'll be back again tomorrow.
Yes. Yep. Thank you very much. And this was Who Tipped Over the Tipping Point? The show to keep the world laughing sustainably. Rather, I should say that again. And indeed, that was Who Tipped Over the Tipping Point with Nico Endulo, which means elephant, Katie Critchlow, Richard Buslato, and myself, the show that keeps the world laughing sustainably. But of course, one of the major items, as I mentioned earlier in the news today, is this thing about carbon capture. And the essence of it, and we reiterate, is that for all the efforts, the governments currently have this problem. We want them to be able to make a decision about phasing down, cutting down, phase out, whatever the term that we might want to express, oil, gas, and coal. But they're not going to be able to do that. So here it is. This came through in the news yesterday. Saudi Arabian minister told Bloomberg on Tuesday that his country would absolutely not agree to do the call for phase down. But equally, some African nations, such as Uganda, have said it's an insult. You're telling Uganda to stay in poverty to do that too. So it's not only just the oil producers, although Uganda is starting its own pipeline, a big pipeline project, ECOP, which is also bringing a lot of controversies in that way. But the fact is, whilst governments will take time to debate over all of this, we as individuals can make use of the capital markets. And I think this is the essence that we have to emphasize and bring out very, very clearly. This is simply about allowing capital markets to go and do what they do best, which is to express our wishes. If we want it so that we can keep it oil, gas, and coal in the ground, it ought to be something that we can purchase and do. Just the same as we can purchase a piece of land and keep it from ever being used. It's exactly the same sort of idea, so that we can protect it for nature, for the planet, and for the regeneration of the planet, and to enable and empower the healing. And what's more, the money that's used for purchasing that can then actually be used instead to finance the grassroots projects that we've heard all about over the course of this period. And that allows us to bring about a healing in a very much a more holistic way. We stop the poison and we carry on with the therapy. And that generally is what we would ideally like to do. Now, we want to leave that with you for now so that you can think about it. But before that, we're going to listen a little bit about the Maasai community and the challenges they face as a result of climate change. And this, again, is a significant issue that we want to be thinking about, our indigenous communities and what they can do, and what are the things that they find, what are the situations that they do. So the situation today is faced by a remarkable community, and I'm just going to start that up. And what we have here are a number of people, young people from that community, talking about it and thinking about what is possible and what are the challenges that they've been facing. So here we go. Water for Maasai, this is called.
There we are. Indeed. We're going to see who we're bringing on here.
Yep,
we have Collins with us.
Stage.
We have
Philip and
That's
David
Philip.
here.
And David.
Yes. So, Philip, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Yes, hi guys. Thanks for bringing me to the stage.
Feel free to turn on your video too if you like, if that's convenient. Obviously, don't if you are improperly dressed or something.
Struggling perhaps with bandwidth.
Sorry about that. My camera is not very well, so please forgive me for that.
No problem. Yeah. There are times when I call Richard and I think, gosh, could you turn your video off?
There you go.
But I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me in here.
So tell me a bit about your background.
Yeah, so that's like more of a, it's like telling me about yourself in an interview. So almost tense, but yeah. I am Philip Barteroy. I am the chair AICA. AICA is a community-based organization currently based in Kajiado County, and we just got started last year, mid of last year, majorly to address issues in regards to the Maasai culture and climate change. So that's us. So I'm excited to be here. I was invited by Kaka. He, told me that we have a discussion in regards to water and the Maasai culture. So I guess that's more of an introduction for now. We can share.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we'll come back to all that a little bit more. And Collins, we often hear you mention Kajiado County, where Philip comes from. So how about yourself? How are you connected with? Are you connected with the Maasai? Is there a personal connection there?
Hello, glad to be here. Hello, David, Richard. Hi, Kaka.
Hi.
And David. Yeah. Glad seeing you today. Yes, David, I have a connection with Kajiado. I think Kaka can attest to that. And it has been an experience for me working with communities around the region, particularly with the youth and the women, and the whole aspect of climate issues. I had an opportunity to actually be coordinating the Adaptation Fund project, which was actually being implemented by one of the grassroots organizations in Kajiado, a women-led organization. And so I had an interaction of how the women in this region are actually taking steps to, manage the crisis, and particularly with regards to, the water issues, the socio-economic aspects. And it has been indeed an experience. And now connecting the KAKA and the ESCGN network students and the amazing work they're doing. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And finally, we have David. Do you want to unmute yourself and just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes. I greet you all. Good evening. It's evening here. My name is David Mterian Kuyata. And I came in when comedy was going on, so I was keenly to listen. And just to add on something, because we're in the line of comedy, right now I'm at home, and the Kajiado you're talking about, that's where I am right now. So if you hear some background sound, cows, dogs, just know I'm home. So I'm so glad to join you guys and to address this noble topic for today, water for Maasais. I know it's an extensive topic and something to be addressed and to be, to lay a strategy and work on it. However, all is well. We have been in the office today running different programs, and today, and we had a conversation that people are talking about tree planting and something, and that tells us there is hope. Young people are coming out with different ideas, beautiful ideas, and that's a small step that our moderator David was talking about. The little step, you might be going in a little pace, but the most important thing is that you're heading toward the right direction. So I believe that to make a difference, I need to take that step. You need to take that step, and I believe we are going to have a better tomorrow and a better world to live in. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone who is here. Let us address this, and I believe that all this is going to work out well, and you're going to have a better tomorrow. So thank you from my side.
Thank you. So let's get moving. Water for Maasai. Now, the idea came through when I visited Kaka at the time of the launch of the EACCGN, the East Africa Camps and Colleges Green Network. And it was the end of a drought that was a multi-year drought. And he was telling me about the pastoral society community that the Maasai represents. Now, I don't know much about Kenya. I don't know much about kind of the continent of Africa and the diversity there. And this is really my first time I've really been there. But I think most people have seen these pictures of the Maasai. Basically, they're in red. They're the classic image that you find when you see something about about Africa, really. And so it's a very kind of it's very much the sort of thing that everybody recognizes. It's ubiquitous in the way that people think about it. I'm going to try and bring up a picture just to show what I mean. So just bear with me for one moment. And there you are. So that's kind of the Maasai people that we have there. And he took me back to where he lived, and then he started giving me this description of what happened over the period of drought. Their community is actually a very modern community in many ways. So this is the aspect I started to understand about indigenous life today. So Kaka is a Maasai warrior who is a law student, who is a top law student in a top university in Kenya. That's basically how it is. And at home and in the urban area, they cross over with that constantly, all the time. As David is describing, he's in Kajiado, which is a place where the Maasai is kind of one of the counties where they are around in that way. And even when you're in Nairobi, you see them walking around through there. The aspect about the drought was that traditionally, in times they would have these long migratory paths, in the sense of pastoral paths, with their cattle and with their goats, and they take it around the country. And and I then later learned that a lot of place names are Maasai names because they travel through the vast expanse of land historically, all around. So I learned that Nairobi itself is a is a Maasai word, and they basically go around and give many place names to many of the places. And you know, Richard and I come from this economic angle, and we always have this kind of economic perspective in the sense because from us, if you can't get the economics right, it's not going to work. And as we go forward, the two of us are adamant, as we explained what was last night, I can't remember now, things seem to fly so fast, about how the economics is going to get harder and harder. So if you're actually going to look about indigenous life and how to maintain it, how to make it work, we have to think about it in a way that it actually creates value for everybody within the community, not just for the indigenous people, but for everybody around it. And so it became, we started having this discussion. We sat in a park, we brainstormed through various things. And the more we thought about it, the more I came to this understanding that actually the livelihood is being threatened by all manner of things. It's being threatened because in the drought, as they lose their livestock, they're being forced to sell the land. If you're a pastoral community, you start selling your land, they basically have nowhere to exist. So that's one aspect that's very fundamental and very basic. The second part of it is when you are trying to take your animals during a poor period of drought from one area to another, and there's a big road in front of you that you can't just cross. Your animals are too weak to go 50 kilometers around one way to find another crossing point and come back in that sense. So the modern world is being built in a way that crisscrosses. And Kaka pointed out that within the law in Kenya, the right to graze is there for the Maasai to graze their animals. But the right of passage is being interfered with. Not with any particular malicious intent, but it's just the way urban development goes. And this is exactly the situations that we keep hearing in our conversations over the past few days, and undoubtedly we'll hear again, which is the unintended consequences of development. And a lot of the energy that the young people have talked about reconnecting with nature made us, at that time when we were sitting in the park and talking about it, to consider how we might actually be able to preserve this amazing pastoral community throughout Africa, throughout Kenya and East Africa and the regions where they are. And to do that, what you need to do is to preserve their ability to travel around. Now, when you look at that, what you then find amazingly is, of course, when they're able to do this, they actually help the land. They bring along better aspects for the land, for the animals and those things. And that's exactly what you want to see. And we started having this aspect about how can you make a proposal to preserve this lifestyle by preserving the land, by preserving the migratory paths, the pastoral paths across vast distances in a way that actually brings benefits to all the community. Not just for the Maasai, but for people to recognize what is good for indigenous life is going to be good for all the communities. It's going to be good for all the countries. It's going to force us to rethink how our cities want to be looking like, how our economics ought to be looking like, and where we ought to be thinking about the possibility. And just to throw that into there before I bring Abraham onto the stage as well, is this aspect where I had this kind of idea, and Richard may like this, of a 100-kilometer Maasai walk, where you have a holiday and you go for walk 100 meters, 100 kilometers over maybe 4 days, 5 days, or whatever it is. And that would be your holiday, a bit like, the dude ranches and those cowboy things you have in America. And you have many of those things where you can actually have a whole kind of a form of an ecotourism that actually helps to preserve it, because it brings in revenues and it brings in notice and interest, and it also allows that to bring in interest for other communities too. So I'm just going to bring in Abraham. Hello, Abraham. Good to see you.
Hello. Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes. Huh?
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes,
We
hi
lost someone.
everyone.
We lost Richard.
This is Abraham. Huh?
Yes.
I'm from Kenya.
And
I'm from Kenya, yes. And I'm happy to joining the group and hoping that the discussion is going to bring impact of the project that we're planning to bring forth. So I'm believing that we're going to work on well. Yes.
so what I want to do is really just to enable conversation between you all. You're all interested, and you all have an interest in there, and basically the way I think of this is, I guess first of all I want to think about how you guys think about that, what you think of the situation, and then to go on to the next part of what do you think is necessary in order to do this, and how to bring in who might be the principal people that would be a beneficial to have, and then how they can come about in different phases. And there may be other ideas of what might be possible, but ultimately what we are looking to is just kind of a sharing of our ideas about just how indigenous life in something like the pastoral living can actually be economically significant to a modern economy and to a modern country like Kenya today.
I think I can jump in as others also gather ideas so that they can also contribute into this. Allow me first of all to say that really I appreciate this, David, and thank you, because since the day we met and we took a tour in my place and the mode of how we try to create water for ourselves and also for the animals is really a great adventure. But I think if you look at the Kenyan history, for instance, if you look at the first president of the Republic of Kenya and the son as well, all the names that they had are all from the Maasai community. So basically, it is the Maasai community who named them. If you look at the word Kenyatta, Kenyatta basically come from the word belt. A belt, Kenyatta in Kimasai is basically a belt that is some sort of traditional belt that is made out of leather. And he was named by the Oloibon who collaborated with the British back then in the colonial period. And if you look at still history, all the places that we have in Kenya, including Nairobi being the CBD, Nairobi means the place of cool waters, and it is now the CBD of the country. But it is so unfortunate that you'll not even see any inhabitant of the Maasai community there. It could be because of the setup of their mode of livelihoods, because these are the communities that really migrate a lot in terms of looking for pasture for their animals. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for the last 2 years, back in 2019, we recorded the largest number of animals lost in the drought. And it did not just affect the Maasai community, but the country ran short of meat. If you look at Kenya Meat Commission, KMC, it has given a report that they never see such a drop for the last decade. So you can be able to see that it is not only the Maasai who really face this crisis ahead, but even the country, and in terms of economy and also all sort of livelihood for the country also goes down. And I can say that one of the biggest challenge we have is, one is the pasture, and then the other one is water. And if you look at what we're doing for some of the activity we're doing in some community linked organization, is that one of the biggest challenge that I think the Maasai people have is that they've not been getting that opportunity to be taught on how they can be able to manage the number of animals they have. This is a very big challenge, because like currently they are rainy season, but you'll find there's a family which has got over 1,000 cows, and they are all fat. But then they don't sell these animals because they are their pride. These people really love animals, They can even sleep with the animals in the shed, in the cow shed. They really love them. And because there's no sort of economy model that says, we need to reduce this number of animals when they still have value. You can sell them and reduce to a manageable herd that you need. But then they don't have that kind of education. So what happens is, when the drought strikes, all these animals, about 70% of them die, and they are left with very small number of animals. So what I think is, this is a whole conversation, not just in terms of looking for water, basically, but also in how do we deploy education to tell them that there are so many other ways that you can be able to, things that we do in terms of keeping livestock, keeping goats. For example, we have got drought tolerant animals like the camel. We can integrate this, which basically can take long distance and long time without basically looking for water. So these are some of the ways we can basically integrate with the breeds we have. If you look at the black-headed sheep, for example, zebu animal, which is a crossbreed of exotic and also indigenous animals, they can be able to give you milk, and at the same time they can give you meat. So you see, you can benefit from milk by selling either milk, also drinking the milk, but at the same time it can also give you meat. So I want to say that one of the biggest challenge we have is basically water. Basically, sometimes not pasture being a big challenge, but water is really an issue, and this had forced our communities to move away from the CBD, and that is why you find that despite the fact that most of us come from were inhabited of different places in this country, Kenya, even in East Africa, we are no longer there because we are pushed by the situation. You cannot just keep the animals in Nairobi, and that is why our laws comes and says, there's no law that says a Maasai person should not graze animals along the road, along the railing, along whatever it is. And actually, I think even in Kenya, I think the Maasai community, because of the rich cultural heritage, they are the only people who are allowed to walk with their ornaments, like the swords and all that in the public, in the national events park here in Kenya. Nobody can ask a Maasai, why are you getting in with a sword or with a club or whatever it is. They just know that it's a way of life, and that is one aspect. So, and then the other aspect that we can also approach this idea of water for Maasai, we can make it abroad. If you look at our culture, it is the only tribe that has got the outstanding culture that can attract tourists. It is our Maasai community in Kenya is it's a whole vibe. Like, people come and watch them dance. They have their dancing way. They have their lifestyle. They have their houses which are made up of mud from the animals, and it is a whole economy perspective on how we can be able to maybe make an additional creation of livelihoods into that line. So as we get deep into this, what I would love us to do, what Philip does at the level of the CBO, they've really been trying hard to see how they can be able to cap the issue of water situation. For instance, harvesting of rainwater has been a big thing to be able to ensure that the water that runs from rooftops and all that is actually tapped. And then the other idea is, we've been also teaching the communities on small scale farming, whereby you can grow small vegetables around your place because there's issue of water. So the water you use in every aspect, you recycle that water to ensure that it is used in different perspectives. And if you go by that, maybe by the time the sheep or the cows have not given birth and there is no milk, the communities can use the vegetables. So that kind of integration can really create a whole perspective of how livelihood can be created. Lastly, according to UNFCCC, if you look at some of the indigenous communities that are set out in the reports that are given, they say that about 60% of the indigenous land is at a risk, and we have seen this not once, not twice. And the reason why they are at risk is because as one of them is what David have mentioned, that when there is no better way of livelihood, people will sell land. That's one way. And when people you compromise land to pave way for buildings, which are going to create chaos and everything, interference of like paths that we used to do when we were grazing, and therefore the biggest indigenous knowledge is what is used in the whole world to protect biodiversity. If you look at like the other day, we had reports in Kenya of the longest forest people who are called the Dorobo. They are being pushed away out of that place. And if you look at Mount Kenya, this is the place where we have all the sources of streams of water. Mount Kenya has water that trickle down all the way that everybody is using in Nairobi. And these people, their lifestyle have been used to be, living in that particular place. So through this, I think we can pinch this in different phases. Maybe I can stop there, but I know we all have really great ideas on how this can be, brought back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. How about let's hear from other people. Abraham, you spoke before, so when we met before. So how do you think of your picture of how you think what are the things that the indigenous life can bring to the whole Kenya, and how can we actually help and make use of that, and what sort of things would that be?
Thank you, my brother Kaka, because of such great minds. And my brother David, the first time you visited Kenya, I asked you why you came to Kenya. He said, I came to Kenya because of the Maasai community. And Maasai community is a global heritage. Yeah? So, like Kaka said, that the Maasai community are now facing challenges all over. And such great minds and ideas of how we thought of how we can change and bring change, how we can change and come up with the potential chances and possibilities to transform and bring back. Though it is somehow difficult for now. I think it is important when we think of number one, education. The only thing and the first thing that will transform our community to a better place, like we always say, is about education. So my thinking on about the Maasai community and the whole project we had about the water for Maasai and the paths and the routes they used to use in the past about migration and the whole thing. I think the most important thing is education and educating our people on how we are going to get the potential possibilities and chances. So I think because we'll keep forward and we'll keep talking about this and we'll keep discussing. I think education is what I speak about, and education is what I can tell you about. As my fellow brothers also are going to discuss and bring forth these conversations that can proceed. Thank you.
Muted myself again after I unmute myself to remind me, but thank you there. So the education part, and again Kaka pointed out about the education part, and you talk about educating about, and this is not just sort of school education, this is education about understanding the environment and what we can do, and in some ways the advantages that we may have in that way. So how about David, what do you think? You actually in a Maasai community at the moment in Kajiado. I see red kind of color behind you, which is a very characteristic color of the Maasai. What do you think are the things that over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Yeah, it's true. I'm there right now, and actually I really appreciate because of the background you gave. I think I was listening to you when you started, and I was like, hey, David did a lot of research, and only to follow and realize that you came and you went to the ground. And you say, there is a saying here in Kenya that mambo ni different kwa ground. I don't know if you will get that, but I'll teach you when you come back to Kenya. Yeah, that when you go to the ground, that is where you get the real scenario of how things are. You'll not be told stories, but we'll go and realize what has happened. Kaka has also given us a history and has laid a background and a foundation for the talk of today. He has given us the background of where we come from. Why do we refer, as Abraham says, we are referred as a heritage? Why is that the case? I think Kaka has laid a very good background on that. Let me just say that all these factors that we mentioned are really affecting not only the Maasai community, but the broader perspective of or a longer range of people, because you realize, just as you mentioned, when you have that when you have the drought, they're affected with the drought, a lot of cattle die. You realize that even if we are exporting meat to other countries, that that production will go, the production will go down, and therefore is going to affect. Again, it's also important to realize that this community, as far as there are a lot of communities here in Kenya, and Maasais are they're among the indigenous communities. That is one, and two, they are also among the marginalized community. I think that's where the rangers, meaning that we are not that bigger community. However, I appreciate the way we are coming up. I mean, education is really falling into us. So there's something that I want to single out to give a lot of weight on these factors that affect us. You know, you realize that drought sometimes affects a lot of a good number of the Maasais, and you realize when these cattle die, and Okaka mentioned and said, we love cattle. I mean, an old man can even sleep with the cattle, and it's just okay. But this brings an effect even to a generation that is coming, because you realize that there is what we call when a girl is being married to another family, there is that dowry that is being paid, and you realize sometimes we lose a lot of cattle, and a home is left with nothing. So what will happen? These young girls of ours who are in school, some of them are married off, so that this old man, or rather this family, can have can regain the cattle back, and realize that will really affect the community at large and the society, because now you realize that maybe that young girl or those girls had dreams, were in school, and you realize that their dreams are being cut short, you know. So broadly, that affect the communities.
You've gone mute, David. You've just gone mute here. I don't know if I can unmute you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
You were talking about
Sorry
how the effect of it can broadly affect community way beyond simply, just the cattle. Is the fact that this is the money that you have, and so as a result you're pushed to desperate actions, and those
absolutely,
desperate actions can destroy the ambitions of the young people.
Yeah, and
how about you, Philip?
So I was just saying. So as I conclude, I just say that as I conclude, I just say that there is hope, because when we see us having such a platform like this and addressing the issues to do with water, with mass, I remember water is life, and I've seen a lot of NGOs, I've seen some people from abroad coming, bringing support. You realize that when you empower these people, they move to another level. That is exactly what we have. That is a conversation that we need to have. When we empower them, they move to another level. Bring the new technologies of farming, like there's no need of having 300 head of cattle. You can have at least 10 freshens, and to realize the production of milk will be there. So there is a solution, but if we go deep and bring this awareness, I'll not speak a lot. Let me give to my friends. Yeah, that's my take.
That's really great, and this is the aspect where, again, there is a new knowledge of animal husbandry. What's the balance between the amount we keep now? How do we take advantage of rain when it comes? How do we actually and of course, one thing I recognize that's important is that for a pastoral community, money doesn't have the same meaning as money do to people in urban centers in that way. And in today's world, in the world of somewhere like Kenya and many of the countries around it, the loss of value of paper money is a significant problem. So if I sell the cow, then I am actually losing money every day. And if I keep the cow, then I'm keeping the value of what I have every day. So I can understand that difficulty. I can understand that, bringing in a new and additional economics, so that I'm not left with just paper in my mattress and hoping that somehow they keep value, but that there can be something else that they can help with the livelihoods all around. And I think that brings in this element of saying, what are the beneficial economics that we can do? what is the transition between them? So I think those would be really interesting. How about you, Philip? What do you think?
Yes, thanks, David. Yeah, great ideas from you guys. I like what you mentioned now, something in regards to money. I think one challenge we've had with our communities is, well, the Maasai lived with their animals, and they never regarded them as an economic model, but it's part of their life, for instance, if the photo you shared, you'll see that in most of the photos you'll see online, and regards to the Maasai, you'll also always see them in red color. So that's like the trademark, or it's a theme. It's in red because it represents one, blood. It represents love. Yeah, those photos, you see, most of them, they are always in red. Why? Because we believe that we're interconnected with our animals. Maasai used to take the blood of the animals directly, raw blood. I don't know whether, David, you could take that. It's actually delicious. So
I have to try it the next time. I have to give that a go.
Yeah.
Please carry on, Philip.
Keeping the animals, pastoralism and whatever. So what we can do is help them, like what the guys have said, to enhance the pastoralism. Like I mentioned, something to do with drought-resistant animals. Like the sheep is mentioned and everything. And yeah, so I think that's all we can do about the animals. So yeah, I would like to mention something in regards to the culture, and I think we all agree that we. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you.
We can. Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes. So we all agree that there are challenges in regards to preservation of the Maasai culture, and it's actually headed to a dangerous direction where maybe in the next recent years to come, it might be phased out, or most of it will be eroded. So what could we do? What can be done?
Interesting conversation, and from where I see it, I just feel like I get listening from my friends who are actually they have grown up in this kind of environment. They understand the issues that they are talking about, and I think from where I sit, and David, maybe how you started this conversation. I'll speak for one. Let me speak now for the women. I know this discussion is going to pick it up from here. We are to get more people from into the discussion, but there is an emotional aspect that comes from the issue when we talk about water. And when David, you mentioned about 100-kilometer walk, and how the It's You campaign has come along, and I was thinking about the intergenerational, kind of talk, and looking at that journey, it's like retracing our roots, and I feel like it's important to have that kind of a journey, where we have our grandfathers leading us into this, memorable kind of emotional journey or walk, to just let the people understand how important this kind of discussion is, because Kaka, David, I agree with what you have said. In most cases, when people talk about drought, probably they just think about there is no the effect, the environment, the livestock, but the spillover effect of that, it's so deep, and I feel like it's important for us to keep this conversation going. And number two, from the discussion Kaka mentioned, we also have the pressures that are coming along with the the urbanization, and the aspect about the culture that Kaka talked about, and how the issues about land, and a whole mix of complex issues that are rising into that. And so from the points that they have mentioned, I'll just summarize by saying, yes, it's time to have this genuine conversation, and to amplify the voices that are actually coming from the people who are feeling the pressures, the children, the women, our grandparents, to be able to speak and let this voice go to to the leadership, to the world, to understand that the crisis and nature is talking to us that it's time to act. And so, yes, David. So I'm looking forward on how this rolls up, and I was trying to imagine that you talked about the migratory path, the livestock, and that journey. I think that journey is a journey that is supposed to bring the intergenerational aspect about it, so that even the next generations can understand what are the steps Kaka, David M, and Philip are actually trying to do for the generations to come. So thank you so much.
Well, that was the first of our conversations for Water for Masai, and it is actually a really interesting conversation which will continue a little bit later. And we hope that you appreciate this aspect of the indigenous life. And what we were trying to bring along to that was to say, how can we make indigenous life economically profitable for everybody? And this aspect is extremely key from the perspective that Richard and I look at the world today, because we see that economically life is just going to get a lot harder forward. That's simply the truth. We can try and avoid it or whatever, we'll experience it in all the different parts. So as a result, when we think about our climate adaptations and what we can do to navigate through the challenges, we have to keep the aspect of how are we going to make a living very much to mind. And at the core and at the core of that has to be about how we spend our money. And how we spend our money needs to address this issue that COP at the moment in COP28 in Dubai is talking all over, which is, can we phase out? Do we phase out? Will we phase out? And is it emissions we phase out? Is it oil, gas, and coal we phase out? What is it that we can do? And those conversations are likely to continue for a very long time, because the nature of governments and the difficulty with governments is that they each have their own particular agenda and their own interests to protect. And as we saw earlier, even a country like Uganda is saying, you'll be condemning us to poverty, you need to pay us first. So it becomes one of these conversations that says, you got to pay us the money before we will do it. And the other parties are saying, of course, you should do it first and demonstrate the goodwill. And it goes round and round in a circle. So to cut through this, what Richard and I propose is to create a market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, so that we as individuals all around the world can lead in doing this. And the idea of that we have expressed yesterday, and we want to play a video again today that demonstrates that along. So please bear. Hopefully you will catch this along, and we hope you.
Slide that we saw for the first time more or less exactly 2 years ago when the IPCC's number 6 report came out. The circles added are actually our own. This is basically where we grow all our food today. As our temperature rises and the soil where we grow our food loses its ability to retain water. This is a recipe for massive geopolitical conflict. It was a massive wake-up call for me and David. And it was really the start of how we thought about what could be done.
And of course, a lot of these regions are actually not growing crops for food. They're growing crops for sustainable plastic or sustainable fuel. So it influences our economy in a very fundamental way. Coming from an investment background and having had 30 years making money for big money, we've come to realize that if you've got something which isn't working, you have to do something about it. And what isn't working at the moment is the reduction in the oil and the gas and the coal production that we have. And to the story of the fact that we can triple our renewable energy by 2030, even when we do that, we would still be increasing our oil and gas and coal production if our energy demand just continues on its path. Having come to that conclusion, we then started on thinking, how can we actually change this? And that's why It's For You came out. And the problem is an economic one. Are people going to pay in order to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? And that's one of the challenges that we faced. And we spoke to many people. The problem, they say, is people don't care. So we then thought we'll find out with It's For You. And we went and we heard many of the stories in the past 6 days, and they have been emotional. They have been really moving. And we have had this aspect where the reflections have brought us to ask, what do we really want? Do we really want to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? Do we really want to think that actually our projects to regenerate and to heal the planet and to bring about a better equality, a better dignity to every person there, do we really want that to be supported by oil, gas, and coal being kept in the ground? We came across a remarkable gentleman, Preston, who actually has a business that does that. And here he is talking a little bit about how he does it.
So I think there is a hesitancy to pay for what you and Richard and all of us are working on here, which is to really go after the ownership of the minerals.
Yeah.
Because I think unless you live here in the United States, it's really government-owned minerals. And it seems kind of like an audacious task to go after purchasing or getting some sort of an operating agreement with the government for control of those minerals. Here in the U.S., obviously, roughly 66% of the minerals are owned by people other than the U.S. government. So it makes it a lot easier. But the next step is, okay, so we're going to buy these minerals, David and Richard. So how do we actually have a return on our investment? And so I think there's an unfamiliarity, or well, there's beginning to be a familiarity. Is that, wait, you can make carbon offsets out of these things? But then they immediately come back and say, well, you're going to have 100% leakage because you're going to take your coal out and then they're just going to mine it someplace else. And, that's an argument that everyone throws out because it's just I don't want to do it. So it's leakage.
And indeed, this leakage problem, right? And it becomes a rationalization in some ways. There are those that says it will just finish. There is only so much oil and gas and coal, and by the time we finish the transition, they'll just run out. And Preston again had this to say about that.
And then the other argument that I run into is that people don't understand is, I'm going to use fake numbers just for simple math for Richard and David and I. Let's just say we have in the United States 100 million tons of active mining projects at any given time today. Okay, so let's just say we're mining 20 million tons a year. So it'd be 100, 80, 60, 40, 20, 0.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reality is, no, it's 100. Last year was 100, and next year is 100. Exactly. Well, why is that? Because we're adding reserves on a daily basis to make up for that we're removing.
And there you go. And Richard, maybe you can explain also why this aspect where the renewable energy becoming cheaper is also not going to make the change.
Well, this is a real area of controversy. And today, wind, solar, and hydro power is very, very competitive. Its marginal cost is below a lot of fossil fuel production. Certainly, the marginal oil field, which at the moment is basically fracking in the US, potential deep water drilling in various Atlantic shelves, or tar sands in Canada, are significantly more expensive than the marginal cost of renewable energy. But I remain somewhat skeptical for a simple fact. There is no stopping the production of these more expensive fields if there is still demand for that energy. So even if the renewable energy producer might be able to turn a profit of $10 per whatever unit they produce, we will still mine coal and we will still drill a hole in the ground or in the sea pumping oil, even if we can only make $1. Because as long as someone somewhere can turn even a minuscule profit, it will be produced. And if it is produced, it will be consumed. So I remain skeptical about the story that only the cost of renewables will manage to displace traditional oil, gas, and coal fields.
So that brings on this conundrum, in some sense, is really down to the owners of these assets, of these minerals. And what would the owners want to do? And the owners can get compensated for owning them and not taking them out. So you can imagine someone starting with that. But the people to compensate them are the people who need the carbon offsets, if they're treated as carbon offsets. But that will only go at a certain pace. But I think we need to move much faster than that, which is what people are talking about. And of course, in many ways, our elections have to deal with each election cycle, whereas our climate devastations are really dealing with a time that is measured in a very different way. So where does that leave Richard and me? And where does that leave you? And this is being for you. It leaves us with this sense that we need to create a very different sort of a market. And here it is. And we need to be able to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. So imagine this. Imagine that you're about to go and propose and get married, and you're there going to looking for your wedding rings. And you're doing this because you have this wonderful vision of wanting to share a future, even if it is uncertain, that you want to have this journey together for that future. What better way than doing that than to know that somehow, in one form or another, a fraction of the money you pay for that special wedding ring goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And in doing that, in having something like this, it lets everybody see that this is the thing to do, simply that. And imagine if you're an employer and you want to motivate your employee and you want to give him a pay rise. What better way to really motivate him than to be able to say to him, look, I will match your pay rise to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And if you can do that, then your employee will feel, actually, you know what, I am working for, even in whatever work I'm doing, I'm looking after our common home. And I'm creating a better future for my children and for all the people around me. And that itself can be quite motivating. And Richard, what about you? What do you think about going to a Taylor Swift concert? How would you think of a fraction of that ticket? Because you go to music concerts all the time.
I think it fits very, very well into the overall picture of saying, when I spend my money, I'm going to spend it with those who I think make my life better. Now let's think about that for a second. I want to direct that spending towards those who make my life better. If I am worried about the future, and I certainly am, then I want the recipients of the money I spend on goods and services to actually be committed to taking oil, gas, and coal out of production and keeping it in the ground. So if I'm prepared to spend $100 on an artist I do want to go and see, it's reasonable that a couple of dollars on that ticket gets redirected towards keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And that applies to all goods and services I can think of. And the mathematics is actually very, very simple. Every business needs its clients and customers, because otherwise you won't remain in business. And all governments need businesses, because otherwise they will not be able to raise revenue and provide the services that the citizens demand from them. So when all that fits together, and given that our economic model is based on us continuing to consume and spend money on these goods and services, we actually have enormous power as consumers of the world to opt to spend our dollar in the pocket with those companies who are committed to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
And the essence is, by investors knowing that there is such a market, that there is such an interest to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground through our spending. And as far as government is concerned, what this does is it actually increases our spending, and that's a good thing for our overall economy. But in doing it in a way that actually helps all the regeneration and the healing we need for our planet, because it's spending that actually goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, as opposed to extracting more of it out to harm and poison our planet and all on it in that form. So this becomes a turning over, flipping of the table, and a new way of actually creating an economy, creating a market that actually moves everything forward, allowing people that choice for them to be able to say, you know what, the money I spend, I can choose who to direct it to. And if I see these people and they are part of the group who are redirecting it to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, investors will be able to come in and will be able to say, you know what, these assets, they're worth buying to keep in the ground because I can be paid on one side in terms of carbon credits. And that generally is associated with the production that's ongoing. And that can come on through by saying, you know what, we'll match it to the renewable energy that's being produced, so that we can match and keep making sure that we have the energy we need. And then on the other side, you can keep those reserves down and start eating away on those reserves, so that out of the 100 million tons, and we take out 20, and then we take out another 20, we genuinely will see that there is only 60 left, and then only 40 left. And in that way, the whole change, the innovations and the creativity would come along and say, how can we move and actually help ourselves to go forward? And that's where technology gets the backing into moving everything together. And so it both liberates us and frees us from this tyranny of the climate. So that's our call, to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, to be able to express our wish that a fraction of the money we spend goes into keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
Indeed. It actually is that simple. We need to create this market for people to see the true cost of the use of oil, gas, and coal, and for us to actually find an economic way of leaving it in the ground. Make no mistake about it. It can be done. We have that power.
And to finish off with just one last thing. If all this seems impossible and all this seems like you can't do this, well, it's the same as what Preston talked about. You know, these are just rationalizations. Because it's time that we put procrastination aside. It's time to believe in the impossible, because waiting is no longer an option. So very much hope that we'll get the support of all the people. We really want to raise this so that we can go along, and for everybody to talk about the possibility of creating a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, where you can have your spending, and your spending becomes a part of the money that will be able to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Oh, well, that was us presenting our call for creating a market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. It is, of course, something that we really feel is very important to do, and we really would appreciate your support in making this happen. The essence of the call is really very, very simple, and that's to say we want this to happen. Because you can say we want this to happen, the businesses will listen to you, and then the investors will listen to that, and then the rest will follow on through. And you can be reassured we will do our best to ensure that that's the situation. But it cannot move forward until people are willing to say, you know what, we want to turn the table on the conundrum at the moment, on the stalemates that we're constantly seeing. We can get ahead of the governments, because the governments will always have to rely on thinking about their next election as the main motivator along, even when they want to think for the long term. But as individuals, as we have heard from individuals all throughout these 8 days, they think for across all generations. They think of the planet as being the source of their livelihood, the source of their peace, the source of their joy, the source of their love. And they think in those ways so that we can reach this and make this happen. So thank you there. And we're going to go back over and continue the conversations amongst the Maasai and hear about thinking about climate independence for them. So let me just get everything ready, and so that we have that there, and I'll bring that onto the screen, and here we are, ready for them about climate independence.
Richard and I were investment managers for 30 years, so we were helping big money make lots of money. Basically, that's what our job was. And one of the aspects about what we learned from that is you have to be very careful about whether all of your investments are basically in the same thing or whether they're not. So if you grow vegetables and you have livestock, then what happens is if there's a drought, your vegetables have problems and your livestock have problems. So in a way, you're investing in the same thing. But there are other sort of activities which might be possible. So the idea of 100-kilometer Maasai walk is something that actually during the time of drought, as you migrate from one area to another area, which may have more water along, you can bring revenue in from attracting people from outside, and in doing so, bring notice to the effect of what drought means to people from outside. And you can do this with education, so it becomes an education all around. And the striking thing that I remember from a conversation was a comment someone made about how as people become urbanized, Kaka, who's studying to be a lawyer, and I've no doubt he will become a very prominent lawyer, and be one of the prominent kind of light in that way. And that will call for him to spend more and more time in urban settings. And if he has family, then those children are removed because you want your children to grow up with you. And again, activities which can allow that intergenerational exchange to be able to connect back in that way. I think those things allow that to go on through. And so being able to continue, being able to think about those things, the economics you bring. I think there have been various things that have been said actually, which I think from my side, basically kind of education, how do we bring about that? And the mention of different types of cows, the number of livestock, the life cycle of managing them and dealing with that. The aspect about water that comes on through, very important, the water part. How do we collect water? How do we make our ways of collecting water very natural, so that they can last for longer and they can use that? How do we use water? Those are actually knowledge that can be very helpful to other people along there. And because the Maasai travel everywhere, they almost by definition are the people who know best where to collect water. It's like the stories of the nomadic tribes in deserts. They know where the oases are because they know the land, they know the way the plants grow, they know where they ought to be. And in that way, as the animals pass through, we've heard about stories about regenerative agriculture. We heard stories about how people, a lady in another part of Kenya is using agriculture to avoid the problems of young girls losing their ambitions by being married too early, and actually realizing that's the way to empower genuinely that sort of thing, which their families actually want to do. It's not like, you know, it's against what their families want to do. It's what their families want to do. It's just, you know, kind of how do you manage to meet the challenges. So I think we probably have a lot of material to bring back together. And I think after this, I'd like to, you know, take this clip of what's been said and share that around. And maybe each one can then think, what do we think of as the positives that we can think of? And saying, okay, how can we do that? Because even in the negatives, there are positives. It is in the challenges that we discover the opportunities.
Absolutely.
And you know, this part of being on the ground that was made, because the ones there on the ground know best. And so you know best out of what you've said, what are the opportunities and what are the things that can be there. So I think that's kind of my task is after this is, you know, to take out that segment, share that to everyone. And you can share that with your friends and things, and then actually ask, what opportunities do they actually say? When we are not saying, we had a conversation, we had a call this morning with a lady in Pakistan, Dr. Sadia Khalid, I believe her name was, who was making a point about that small first step. It doesn't need money, but taking that small step takes away the fear. And then what you need to do is to be quite structured and systematic in thinking through what that will take you for the subsequent steps. They don't have to be perfect or they don't have to work, but you have to have some sort of a plan for yourself so that you can actually go forward, because otherwise there will be too much second guessing and not enough will kind of bring conversation to all the other people around. So how does that, Richard, how does that sound to you? What do you think from your summary of what's been said?
I think there are various aspects we can A, focus on, and B, spread to others so we can actually enrich in the discussion and come up with better ideas. For me, it seems like it's going to be incredibly central to figure out how you are going to collect, store, and use water. That will be absolutely central, those three bits. Can you collect it? Can you store it? How little can you get away with using? Because it's going to be a very, very, very central to the sort of continuation of the tradition, because it's not going to get easier from the climate side.
No, but I would like to add actually that there's an extra dimension to that, because as a pastoral life, and from my understanding from before, I think Abraham was the person who told me that before, is that people used to travel from place to place in times of drought and seasons change and so on. So the question of storing water is about how to prepare in the different regions, knowing where they are.
Absolutely.
So it's not the same as I live in one place and how do I store water in this place? It's about how do I take advantage of the different changes in all the different areas of land so that I have a ready path. It's like in, is it Sweden or Norway, where they have those huts for people to go hiking in winter?
Yeah.
And they're stocked up, basically.
Yeah.
And people know where they are on the map, and they can make the hikes, and they go there, and they know there will be, you know, something to light a fire. They know there will be, you know, something for them to be able to rest and so on.
It's a refuge. But
yeah.
Even if you make the sort of distinction between nomad or pastoral lifestyles compared to stationary one, it doesn't change the fact that you will need to figure out how you're going to collect and store the water. Just that you have to do it in multiple locations, and some of them might not be very suited.
And therefore, in that way, you know, some of the things that Kaka and I talked about, right, that, you know, you can have very basic captures of energy that's around all the time, little wind that blows along. They can help you just to pump up water and store it. and they can just be there, and you can actually become the people who are experts in that sort of off-grid technology, how to capture energy away from needing a large grid. So that's a dimension that just in this conversation as you're describing comes on through.
No, absolutely.
And again, if you do that, it benefits all the other communities around.
Sure. It will, per definition, have to be a small grid, local grid, because my assumption will be, looking at the map of the world, that the pastoral nomadic areas of the world in general, and Kenya in particular, not being exactly a small country, is not going to be connected to a large grid for a long time to come. And many areas will simply perhaps never be. So the energy solutions, per definition, will have to be local or localized. There is just no way you can connect it to the central. Then you have the aspect of mitigation and adaptation. Can you work with different types of animals that are more resistant? How much that actually changed their overall lifestyle? Is that a quantum leap, or is it just a tweak?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you to everybody, and maybe you can all give kind of a short summary of how you feel about this, and we'll get another chance to speak again and take it on to the next level. Kara, do you want to start first?
Yeah. What I will say is that I'm a staunch believer of change. Because if you look at what I have achieved at my very young age, is really a complex thing, kind of a situation, and God has enabled me to be able to have that kind of a voice, to be able to reach to everyone. I got a chance to speak to Ruto just after his election. I gave him actually one of the books about sustainable truth, and I think with this kind of exposure, I think the last time we talked with you, David, we mentioned that we need to identify resources because they are everywhere, and that's also what I believe in. And what we need to do is we need to have this extensive conversation. In fact, the next meeting, I'm going to bring someone called Fantas, who I'm really trying to think of the diaspora people who lives in the UK and all the other places. These people are Maasai, majorly Maasai community. I know about over 10 people who come from Kajiado who lives in the diaspora, and I'm pretty sure, pulling together, thinking together through one aspect. Maybe boreholes might not work for us. Maybe dams might not be maybe a way. We have to think on a really a very critical kind of way that can be able to help us in that line. The other aspect is basically, extensive this calls to different rich Maasai people, like the governors where we come from. And I know that when they carry this conversation and have this dialogue, there always be solutions out of that. The other day we had a conservancy that was taken away from us as the Maasai community. This was a place that used to raise a revenue of about 100 million every year. From the animals. It borders Tanzania on one side, and just the other day Ruto gave it back to the Maasai community, which was a very big plus to us, because now it means through the tourism activities, the indigenous people can put money directly to their pocket. And honestly, what I believe is that, if you look at even the mode of our mothers, the art they have at their hands, the way they make beads, this is really a whole economics perspective that we can be able to indulge in as a way of diversity, not just necessarily to stick to animals basically, but we can be able to have diverse means of how we can be able to create a livelihood. So this is an endless conversation, and how I believe that you can be able to be picking these talks in different phases. I hope that we will be able to have some sort of writing also to be able to be following up on what exactly stage we are and what we are doing, but maybe to be just a very practical part of it. I think AICO will be really a better place to maybe start pulling this out, because it's registered a community-based organization. It has been there on the ground doing a lot of things, and I think if you link this through And that I think Kenya can be really a model of everything. It can run now across Tanzania and every other places of origin of the indigenous communities, specifically the Maasai people. So I just want to say really thank you for all of you. And also thank you, Collins, for bringing the aspect of women, because really women are really also the epitome of change in terms of what they do. Like if you look at my primary school, I was brought up by my mom through selling out of beads, and to me this was really great. I remember how I used to, like some years down the line, there was a place in Nairobi whereby all the Maasai women will come down and put their beads on the ground, and then they will sell. And that's how I was brought up through like my O levels and grew up like studying and all kind of thing. And of course, to people like us who the community is looking out for, we understand that there is a lot of land for the Maasai that is lost unconstitutionally, like just land gone out of their hands. Lots of acres of land, either they were conned because they have a new aspect about papers. We stand to believe that we are going to reclaim all this and bring back to the community, and through that, we'll be able to bring a whole change to the people and also to the community at large. Those are in my 2 cents, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Philip?
Yes, thanks again. Great comment from Kaka there. And thank you guys for this conversation. Thank you, David. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Collins. Thank you, the other guys, for joining in. I believe what starts here today is something good that's going to make a great impact, not only in the lives of the Maasais, but to other communities around. And I believe this is phase 1 of this conversation. And I believe that we'll be doing frequent conversations in regards to the same. Maybe suggest that maybe we could be doing it at least maybe once in a month. And like Kaka said, we need to expand the conversation, like extend it to other people of the same mind. He mentioned people in diaspora, he mentioned local authorities. We also have people in our communities that could be, could have very good ideas that could take us forward. And I'm very interested in your thought of the 100 kilometers walk. We could make this one of way of reaching out to the community first. Like we can invite very prominent people to work with us, and then we could have this conversation with the local communities. I also mentioned something to do with something we called cultural boma. We're working on that, and maybe some other time when we are open, we'll invite you guys. We could come and have a dialogue and see how to preserve the culture as long as try and improve the lives of people around. So for now, you can actually Google for Masai Manyata. If you Google that, you'll be able the Google Maps will be able to lead you to the exact location where the our cultural boma is located at. So for now, I guess we could, we go thinking about other ideas on how to, improve the livelihoods of these people, and mostly how to preserve this culture, because it is a resource not only to us, but it's something very important to the future generations. So I guess that's what I can share for now, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you. And David?
Thank you, David. I see you're also David, my namesake. So I'll not have much to say on. A lot have been said, but I just want to highlight that the community that we are talking about today, the Maasai, there is 2 aspects. I know there are many, but let me mention 2. That is one of the characters that they have. One, these people are very peaceful. They have even welcomed other communities. And if you follow the history of Kajiado County, is turning to be a metropolitan, meaning that other communities have come here, we have mingled together, and it's so peaceful. 2,
they are so welcoming. So even those from abroad, those from all over, they always have a tendency of welcoming everyone to their home, teaching the culture. Like last year, I had a lady from the UK. She came home. She said that I want to test blood. How you guys do it? Actually, she did it. I have some videos. Maybe probably I'll share sometime. But just to conclude on this is that when I see such a conversation in such a platform, we see hope and we see change coming. And who is addressing this? I see a face of young people in the front line addressing such issues, meaning that in a few years to come, we'll be having a different conversation. So we really have hope on this. And thank you, David and Richard, for bringing this on board and for addressing this. I just want to say that we are heading to the right direction. And in a short while, or rather in a few years to come, if all these are going to be addressed, we are going to have a different conversation. We are going to have, young people from even this community coming out and also helping others, because you help them today, they will help others tomorrow. But just as I like the conversation that David had towards the COP28, that redirecting the spending. I mean, redirecting it to the needy. I mean, to where exactly we can impact, where we can, where we can change the world. I really like that conversation. And therefore, if we redirect, bring it down to the ground and probably help such communities, help this growing country, we'll be able to have a better world to live. So thank you very much. And I wish you all a good night.
Thank you. And Collins, last words from you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for my dear brothers for giving us a clear perspective of water. Water is life, and I just want to say I'm looking forward to the next discussion about this issue. And there is a short safari series, like an ebook written by David Waweru, and he titled it "Where Did the Water Go?" And that kind of puts us in a pause just to be quiet and understand that aspect of what will happen. And from the It's For You discussions about especially the meditation part of prayer and meditation, and the discussion we have been having, and the journey about this work that I'm actually looking forward to. Let it be a time for the leaders and the people who love the culture of the Maasai to also stand still and just reflect. Actually, where did the water go? I think from that starting point, people will learn to appreciate that it's indeed important for us to take care of our planet. So thank you.
And thank you. And Richard comes from Sweden. In the north of Sweden, there are the Sami people, and they again have this issue between the increasing changes of the landscape. Sometimes from the climate, sometimes from the urbanization, sometimes from factors which is just to do with just the global economy and the way it changes. I think I'm really encouraged by the comments here. I'm really excited at the prospect of going for a 100-kilometer walk. I think this idea of getting prominent people to do this is a great way to start. And and the walk, I can feel it. It's going to be such a great feeling. It's going to be so liberating in many ways, that aspect, people to connect. And you know what? These things we can do without necessarily having anything there, because the land is there. It's all available. It's still there. And it takes a few days. And in those few days, we can connect. So I'm really looking forward to that too. I think that's a great kind of opportunity to start. We can see the lie of the land. We can see where the water is, where the water is not. We can see the communities, and we can say hi to everybody. What could be better than that? So thank you. And thank you very much for everybody. And we'll catch up with you afterwards, and we'll find out more. And we'll get another opportunity before the end of the 12 days to get yourselves back together I hope that Kanta would have been able to join us, and maybe she's going to be the next time. And I have a message from Abraham, who was earlier and cannot connect back, and he says, on about tracing the migratory paths and routes of the pastoralists or the Maasai community. It is important when it's done in the 4 steps you mentioned, because it's to be beneficial not only to the Maasai community but also to the entire Kenya. So I think that's the best part of this, which echoes what Dave is saying. It's a peaceful community, it's a metropolitan community, and what this is trying to do for Water for Maasai is not just for Maasai, but it's for you. Thank you very much. Well, there we are then. That's really the first of the conversations, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you more of those conversations before the end of the 12 days of COP. But honestly, I'm very much myself looking forward to this 100-kilometer walk. I think that will be an incredible, amazing experience, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to feature that to you at another time. And of course, we go back at the moment. We've talked a lot about the effect of climate change on the indigenous people, and that we had a conversation right at the beginning on the first day with Mark Campanale, who is the founder of Carbon Track and is also the founder of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Very much interested in this aspect of making sure that we reduce the role of carbon within our economies, within our finance, and also on ensuring that through government policies and civil society, we're able to bring to the end of the reserves that keeps expanding in the oil and gas and coal in that way too. And he's a very hopeful person, and his message is one of very much of hope that we're turning over the corner with the fossil fuels, and that the renewables are going to be the ones that are going to dominate. Our own idea, our own belief is that we very much would like that to be the case, but we just need to be sure. And if you're going to be sure about it, you want to do something about those reserves to make sure that you're not just left to the whim of the economy to make that happen, but you actually take action to shape the economy, to change it so that you can actually create a market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. However, we want to play you the whole conversation we had together with Mark Campanale. He really is a very thoughtful person who has spent considerable time really delving and understanding into all aspects of the issues that we face. So here he is again. Let me bring him on stage and get that started for you in that way.
Hello, everybody. Please welcome Unsustainable Truth. Today with us, we have Mark Campanale, the founder and director of Carbon Tracker. Delighted to have him with us in the studio to debate all the things that really matters. And of course, next to me is also Dr. David Coe. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you today.
So I guess, you just kind of released the schedule for your COP events and so on. Do you want to give us, the lowdown on that?
Yeah, so going to the COP, I don't know how many people listening to this today will have been to a COP, but two things really to know about it or to think about it is there's a lot of complex discussions being held by government and policymakers and negotiators. And most people going to the COP, and there'll be 30, 40,000 people, most people don't actually ever get to see what goes on in the room. I think you can listen in to some of it, but so that's kind of off limits, but you see all the delegates going in and out. And then the second thing is some people treat it like a large trade show or trade fair. So you get literally hundreds, if not thousands of lobbyists, companies, investors, obviously think tanks and environmental groups, and they are all trying to get you to go along to their event or to listen to what they've got to say. Finance was not a track, as it were, but has increasingly become a track at the COP. And so, you'll see the biggest institutional and pension funds and investors there at the very, very senior levels. So, you'll see top people walking through the pavilions. And then, of course, government types who wander out of the negotiations or part of a delegation. I think I spotted Tony Blair there last year. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing. So the Pope will be coming this year. So you'll see kinds of international figures which will be part of this process. But as I say, everyone's trying to get you to go to their pavilion. And then you've got the big brands having their events, the Bloombergs, and there'll be kind of like mini conferences that will last a day long. And so, but the key to all of this is you've got to have a Blue Zone Pass issued by the UNFCCC. And if you get the Blue Zone Pass, then you can get in and listen, go to along all these meetings and go to all the country pavilions and all the different stands and listen to the discussions. And if you don't have a Blue Zone Pass, then you'll just have to make do with what's called a Green Zone Pass, which is for everybody else. And they will also have a bit of sort of a trade show element to it as well, but also lots of NGOs and civil society groups. So about the highlights, about what to look at. The reason why Carbon Tracker is there is we're trying to bring our perspective into the thinking of the international media, the financial community, policymakers. And those who know about Carbon Tracker's work, we're focused on the clean energy transition, but with a particular understanding of the fossil fuel industry and who's the role of the capital markets in funding the fossil fuel industry and what we need to do to get off of fossil fuels to build this new clean energy future. But the central conundrum, and I won't be the first person to say this about the COP, is the COP is not there to talk about fossil fuels. It's nothing to do with fossil fuels. The COP it's an emissions reduction treaty. So governments are there to make pledges to talk about emissions reductions. And so here we go. We've had 20 plus years or whatever it is of COP discussions where you can't talk about fossil fuels and climate change. It's a bit like having a debate about giving up smoking where you're not allowed to talk about cigarettes. And that's
a bit like
the COP.
It's a bit like going to the doctors, not being able to tell them what's wrong with you.
Yeah. And so actually getting the words fossil fuels into the final communique has proven to be almost impossible. Last year, they managed to get in phasing out coal, and that was changed at the last minute to phasing down coal. So as everybody knows, the principal cause of heating of the planet is because we keep burning coal, oil, and gas. And so to have a climate negotiation where you can't talk about that is a form of insanity and deeply frustrating. When I was at the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, I bumped into an event. I went to a meeting at a hotel outside the Blue Zone, and it was a meeting of a group called Parliamentarians for a Fossil-Free Future. And I went in there, maybe there's 100 sort of negotiators and parliamentarians, and I thought I'd stumbled into the real COP. I thought this is the real COP, guys. We're here. And there were some great speakers, sort of women and men delegates from around the world, from different parts of the world, talking about the problem of climate change is because of fossil fuels. And what do we need to do to get off of fossil fuels? And obviously there was a discussion of the two major initiatives that are underway. One is called BOGA, the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is a kind of a country-to-country top-down negotiation or discussion about permanently retiring oil and gas licenses. And then the other one, which is kind of more bottom-up from civil society, is the one I'm involved in, which is called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we've talked about, which is garnering a lot of support from countries, from Nobel laureates and prize winners and the academics and civil and scientists and civil society. And that's an attempt for all countries to negotiate in a just and economically rational way, permanently giving up coal, oil and gas in a way that will allow us to remain within the well below 2 degrees budget. I think it's fantastic.
Yes.
Fossilfueltreaty.org.
Okay, well, I think that's definitely fossilfueltreaties.org. I'm going to try and figure out how these overlays and things. So, Richard, while you're going to do that, I'm going to try and get that up onto the screen.
And Carbon Tracker, we have our own supporting initiative called the Global Registry of Fossil Fuels, which is mapping all of the world's current, planned, and future coal, oil, and gas production, and that's fossilfuelregistry.org.
Yeah.
And anybody can go into it and see where the projects are and which countries. And the key thing about it is a registry of embedded carbon dioxide, how much CO2 is in the reserves that are controlled by companies and governments. And it's a kind of a forward-looking indicator that says, look, if these licenses have been handed out and these projects are under development, we can presume that the companies think they're actually going to bring them to the market, which I think is a reasonably fair assumption. If you're going to put billions of dollars into developing these projects, they think they're going to get it to market. Well, anyway, there's enough, projects to take the world way beyond 3 degrees. And so what contractors are trying to do at the COP is just draw these threads together. And so we're going to have an event on electrification of cars that will how will demand destruction for petrol, because people will be driving electric vehicles. What will that mean for oil and gas producing countries? And then we're relaunching, it will be the second edition of our Beyond Petrostates report, which looks at 30, 40 countries whose balance sheets are only really strong from a credit rating point of view because they're obviously petrol dollar state countries. And what's going to happen to them as the world moves away from fossil fuel use, and what will happen to the revenues of whether it's Russia or Mozambique or Nigeria or Canada. And we're trying, so we'll be launching that. And then I'll be speaking at a series of, it'd be a bit like the Hyde Park corner. So, you're standing on a box. Listen to me.
But slightly grander.
Oh yeah, they'll be slightly grander. There'll be medium stages. And of course, everyone thinks that they've got the special secret sauce or the special formula to resolving the climate crisis. And I think the answer is that everybody's got a bit of the picture and they've got part of it. And so we're there to learn and listen. And there'll be voices from the global south, which is so important. And traditionally underrepresented voices will be at the COP. And there is a good place to go and meet and listen to people that you're never going to hear or meet when you're living in London.
Yeah, and I mean, on that, definitely, I think that there's a side where, we've been working more with young people in East Africa along there. And one of the things I'm learning along, and I'd like to know how you think about this. There's all this talk, people, about how they are, the African continent is 17% of the world's population. It uses like 4% of the world's energy. And what I'm learning from is that they're very well connected with their environment. And so they don't actually use the energy in quite the same way as we do. And I wonder whether the real lesson is from them to us. How should we reconnect with our environment better so we know how we might use our energy more effectively without kind of presuming, as Richard's kind of bugbear is that energy is the cheapest it's ever been, and it's just ridiculously cheap.
You look through history, and it's like energy is a precious resource. We need it desperately for our well-being, not to say survival in a lot of places. Otherwise, we're goners. So if it is so important, how come we are prepared to pay less and less for it as a share of our disposable income? It doesn't really make sense to me. When we know, on the other hand, that the damage is being done by our overuse of energy.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making, but I'd also go one step further and say what you mean is fossil fuel energy. Because the cheapest source of energy in the world today, in most, if not all parts of the world, is renewable energy. And when gas prices and energy prices were hitting 26, 28 pence a unit, maybe more last year, renewable energy was being supplied at 6 to 8 pence a unit, just to show the cost difference. And I don't think that those of us working in broad climate related issues, I don't think we've done a very good job communicating the fact that the new energy system that we're building will be a clean energy system. So we shouldn't be afraid of, I don't think we should be afraid of energy per se, because the growing availability of cheap energy, of course, has been what's fueled economic growth and human prosperity. But what we want to do is decarbonize it by electrifying it, as much of it as we possibly can. but at the same time, hopefully making it cheaper for people. And I think that the wonderful thing about, once the Inflation Reduction Act in America is pushed through, and we adopt clean energy and EVs in the UK at scale, that I hope that energy prices and energy costs to the household will drop. And I think there's every reason why it should. So if we think about the energy system for 1 minute, there's two parts to it. You've got your physical part, which is your power station, and then you've got which is your stock, and then you've got your flow, which is the energy that goes into the power station, which could be coal or gas. And what we're creating with the new energy system is we're removing one half of it. So we just have the physical bit, which could be solar or wind. And once you've paid off the cost of your turbine or your battery storage or your solar, your energy at that point, the marginal cost of your energy drops towards zero or trends towards zero.
Yeah.
Because you've eliminated one half of it, and so the energy system will get smaller, even though we'll be using more of it, because we won't need half of it, and we won't need tankers carrying oil from one side of the world to the other, or ships carrying coal from one side of the world to the other. I mean, we certainly won't be needing any of those LNG ships in quite the same scale. And then we won't need the petrol stations, and we won't need the refineries in quite the same scale. And those petrol tankers going up and down the motorways, well, we probably won't be needing most of those. And so what we'll then have to think of is a bit like what happened in the 60s when everyone said that the cost of nuclear would get so cheap, but cheap energy would be virtually free, is we'll be thinking about how to use the energy, and the money we're not spending on energy, the £3,000-4,000 a typical household today in the UK, we'll be thinking of, actually, could we use that for something else? What I'll have to think about, but most people in the UK, even with the prosperity we have, struggle to make ends meet. Maybe things will become a little bit lighter, the burden on low-income households. At least one would hope so. And I think that's the wonderful story of the energy revolution that we've got to get across to government and to us, to community. And I was reading today's Financial Times that's talking about if Trump is re-elected, the first thing he would do is come out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and the other thing he'd do is he would roll back the Inflation Reduction Act, and he would clamp down on renewable energy and boost fossil fuels. And when you actually look, why is he doing that? The reason for it that they're using, I don't think it's entirely ideological, but it could be, is because they use this phrase cheap energy, and actually that's our phrase.
Yes.
Our phrase. That phrase cheap energy belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the fossil fuel system. It belongs to the new clean energy system, and we've got to reclaim it forcibly.
Well, I mean, clearly Trump is, this election coming up in the US next year, is very much dominating the situation. If anything, is as much of a driving force towards not talking about the term fossil fuel, kind of oil and gas and coal, not being able to say it's anything else. I don't know how you feel about the prospect of him coming back in, but I think the world has changed since the last time. I don't really get the same sense of kind of excitement all around at the prospect of a free-for-all that comes when he comes on board. I think there's more of a sense of, kind of concern and reticence about what happens if he does come again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of what you would call green Republicans who quite like the fact that they've got a turbine in their field and a solar panel on their roof, and they like selling their energy to their neighbor. What is Trump going to do? Have the police turn up and rip your solar panels off your roof? I mean, what do you think he's going to do? Saying, no, you can't earn money from selling your energy into the grid. I mean, this is the baffling thing about US politics. It's so ideological that they will ban renewable energy where they can just to make a point.
Yeah, that's idiotic, and it strikes me as deeply ideological.
Yes.
And I also suspect, and I suppose there is a little bit of really near-term political meandering, in the sense that strong Republican states tend to have a lot more fossil fuel production, which in the short term would hurt employment, and therefore you need to pander to these separate interests if you want to gather enough.
But even in the US, you know, and growing parts of the world, more people are now working, more jobs are being created in renewable energy than in fossil fuels. And that's another message we need to get across. Decentralization of energy will create more jobs at a local level rather than centralized energy situations where you've got a huge coal-fired, gas-fired power station. You brought your fuel in from the other side of the world and have operators chucking into an oven. You know, I think people will like the idea of looking after 20 neighbors' solar systems or air source heat pumps in the home or whatever, and you'll create good, high-quality local jobs. And you know, it's another part of the message that we haven't got across. And even in the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it's well known that the so-called Republican red states have benefited proportionally more from the Inflation Reduction Act than the Democrat blue states. And actually, the biggest beneficiaries have been Republicans, with the exception of Florida, because DeSantis said, we don't want any of your renewable energy jobs in Florida.
No, we only have retirees. Who should work?
Florida, we're die-hard fossil fuel supporters. And of course, Florida being one of the first, unfortunately, Miami in particular, first of the states to be hit by extreme weather events and storm damage and ultimately flooding. So, I mean, why not? You have to scratch your head.
So, I mean, you know, Richard and I were talking to some people before who, you know, to push kind of the argument a bit on the other side. There's a lot of view that, you know, just because renewable energy is cheap doesn't mean that we won't actually just simply have both. And there is a lot of, you know, kind of, you know, if I can make money taking coal off the ground, I'm going to do it because I can make money out of doing that. So how do you feel, you know, because I think there's this side where, is it sufficient just to have cheap renewable energy, or is there something else that's necessary? You know, maybe this speaks to the Non-Proliferation Treaty directly in that sense.
Well, I think that the renewable energy system that's being built has to grow faster than the energy demand is growing to ultimately kill demand for coal, oil, and gas. And all the signs is that the key technologies are experiencing exponential growth. And in particularly in solar and wind. And I just saw a headline the other day that Q1 exports, or rather Q4 exports of Chinese solar from just one Chinese solar manufacturer was equivalent to about 20 nuclear power stations in terms of potential power generation. And so this is growing at massive scale very quickly. And we will see within 5 years real demand destruction for fossil fuels, particularly for coal. Now there are some parts of the world where you don't have a free market in energy. You've got a state system, state monopolies, and the way it's structured is to benefit the existing incumbent energy provider. And for a long time, I think even until relatively recently, and I understand the laws changed in South Africa, the main energy power provider in South Africa, which is a coal company, is a monopoly. They're the only ones who have the right to create energy and put it and sell it to consumers. But once we create open markets and competition, the cheapest source of energy will prevail. And if you can get your energy solar, a mini grid, or a direct wire from a solar provider to a company, where you can get cheap, reliable, constant energy, that's the system we'll be moving to across the world. I mean, there's hiccups along the way. The biggest hiccup, and I think you're well aware of this, is grid capacity. There's just not enough cables being manufactured to connect wind to the grid and to lift up the grid in terms of investing in it and developing its capacity is an issue for not just for the UK but across the world. And we won't get the clean energy revolution. So you hear stories of there's wind and solar stacked up ready to go. They won't get onto the grid into the 2030s because we just don't have the right grid connections, and it's not the wind is arriving in the wrong place So we have to solve these problems. But the key thing to take away is that these are solvable problems. They are not impenetrable, irresolvable problems. They're things that we can deal with better cooperation and investment and better policy.
Will we be able to do this in time, you think, to save 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 degrees? Where is your gut feeling that we will end up before the process you're describing is in full motion?
Well, I think we're at close to and at 1.5 now, and we're certainly within a few years away from it. So global emissions are something around 40, 41 gigatons a year. Maybe 36 of that is from burning fossil fuels.
Yeah.
The carbon budget, the remaining carbon budget to 1.5 degrees is 280 to 300 gigatons. So you can do the maths. We run out of runway within 5-6 years or so. And then 2 degrees is not that far after that. And I saw a chart that, was published by the esteemed Assad Razouk of Angry Clean Energy Guy podcast fame.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, very good person to follow because he's got a acute kind of awareness of the importance of this in the news, is that we did pass for a number of days at 2 degrees of warming.
Yeah.
So we may be ratcheting up faster than we thought. So where do I think we will land? Well, I think we're definitely going to overshoot 1.5. And based on the policies that it looks like governments are implementing, assuming that the Inflation Reduction Act remains in place in the US, particularly the support for clean energy, that we should be able to stabilize at 1.7, 1.8, maybe even 1.6. It's not where we need to be. And if we overshoot, maybe we'll have to use huge scale nature-based solutions, a little bit of CCS to get us back to where we are. But the problem with net zero, as I understand it, it's not just about netting off the emissions from fossil fuel use today. You actually have to remove all the CO2 from the atmosphere that you put up there in the last 50 years. So we've gone from 350 to 420.
Yeah.
I think the scientists would tell us we've got to work our hardest to get another 50 parts per million out of the atmosphere. And the CCS plants that the Chinese government and the American government recently announced in the sort of the recent meeting with Biden, the Chinese premier, that investment, I think, is going to create 5 CCS plants each by 2030. And yet, according to the work that we've done, we're going to need 300 large-scale CCS plants constructed every year for the next 10 years. And all that does is give you another 15 years extension of your carbon budget before you go back to sort of start again. So all of this is telling us the most rational thing to do is to rapidly get off burning fossil fuels, including gas. I mean, gas, everyone thinks that gas is a shale carb-free. It certainly hasn't, certainly when you add fugitive emissions in there. So we need to get off the fossil fuel system and build the clean energy one. I want to say to my kids who ask me, yeah, we'll get there, we can do this, but I'm afraid, Richard, that I'm more than a little apprehensive about it. And
makes two of us.
Of the mind, optimism of the will, or whatever is the phrase.
Well, I mean, I take it from that one of the issues is about abated carbon sources. From what you described it, I think you.
I don't like that phrase. I don't like it because it kind of suggests to people that there's a difference between abated and unabated. Yes. But then when you actually look at the capex that the companies are spending to deal with the emissions from their products, it's a trivial few percent. And I recently argued in a public forum with one of the oil producing nation representatives who was trying to say that they as a producing country are not responsible for the emissions from their products.
Yeah.
And I had to remind him that that when the tobacco companies went to court, they argued it's not us producing the cigarettes that killing people, it's people smoking them. It didn't stack in court and the companies lost. And I said, I think the courts will settle in the same way. If there's ever a serious court case brought against the coal, oil and gas companies. I think the court will say, well, actually, your products are the ones that cause the problem. Your promotion of those products over the last 30 years has caused the problem. And these are companies making hundreds of billions of dollars of profit, which has to be disgorged to pay compensation, particularly, to support the loss and damage fund that was proposed at the COP, and to compensate the global south for the huge damages that have been caused by the promotion of fossil fuels and the denial of the science.
Well, that's the part that actually worries me the most of all the aspects around climate change. Is you don't need to be particularly scientifically gifted like me to actually interpret the chart of what has been common knowledge for half a century. And still you have people debating its actual merits. And that really terrifies me.
Yeah.
It's like, are we arguing that the Earth is still flat? Or have we come to the conclusion that it's round? Just because there are people arguing it's flat, right? It doesn't make it right, because we know that the damage has been caused by our excess use of fossil energy. So
I know both of you have financial markets backgrounds like me. And I think that where all the denialism is, and it has occurred, the companies have been thought that they were just battling the scientists and civil society, and that they could dominate government, which they have done the last 20, 30 years. Clearly they have. Even this current government in the UK is an example of that. And then all of a sudden the financial community wakes up and says climate risk is a systemic risk to people's wealth and the stability of the financial system. And our ability to do business as investors needs a secure planet and financial system, a stable financial system. And the voice of capital has suddenly, the last few years, particularly with the leadership of Mark Carney and G-Fans and others, woken people up. And I think the companies have spotted that, and they've been kind of fighting back themselves, and with a rearguard battle, which they're now taking on the financial community by outspending them. We hear of this $1 billion budget that they have to push an attack on what they call woke capitalism. The rest of us just call risk management, because that's what, risk management. They call it wokery. If your building's on fire, you don't say, I'm not going to put the building to fire out because using a bucket of water is woke. You put out the fire. And I think that's why finance is trying to put out the fire by looking at the causes of the fire.
I think actually today, it's more like them saying, no, it's not on fire, why it's burning away. I think that's actually closer to the truth.
Well, I mean, that's to an extent, that's probably true. And today we've been reading and hearing that the letter from the Chancellor in the UK, Hunt, to the Bank of England, downgraded climate as one of the key responsibilities of the Bank of England. And I think there's a hugely retrograde step, and very unfortunate, actually. Because in our estimates at Carbon Tracker, we published some research recently that looked at the potential damage of 2-3 degrees of warming on wealth, and the write down of the value of people's assets. And not just will there be a decline in GDP, there will be an absolute destruction in wealth from climate. And I think, if the Bank of England has got to keep an orderly financial system, it's got to make sure that wealth isn't being destroyed and that there isn't impediments to the economy, offering and giving people what they're looking for, which is better living standards and so on. And so I do think this is crucial. It's sad to see otherwise smart, intelligent people attacking something which is logical. The other thing I noticed recently in finance is a slight change away from solving the climate crisis is a good thing to do to no, we don't want to say it's a good thing to do because of all these attacks. We've just got to narrowly look at it as a risk issue. But even then it's being attacked if you look at this as a risk issue. We can see this from the subpoenas and the letters from Republican attorney generals to all the major asset managers in the world and banks who have a climate risk policy. So yeah, one of the things which we'll be looking to do is publish something, hopefully with one of the major universities in the UK and London, a study looking at the lending policies of the banks and the investment policies of the asset managers around what they do with fossil fuels, because it does seem utterly ridiculous that when the IEA and others say that no new investment is needed anywhere in any new oil and gas projects, the banks are ploughing ahead funding new oil and gas projects, and using the savings of the public, and so we need more scrutiny on this, I think.
Yeah, I think all these things fit very well together, and I am seriously struggling to understand how you can mandate a central bank to disregard risks. I might be, more extreme than most in my views of what the climate crisis could bring to the financial system, and I'm actually worried beyond the financial system. I'm worried about the social system and what happens if we really break hard, because the costs are stacking up faster than we can model, and then we lose control of how to deal with them. But I cannot see any rationale for why you would want for a better word, the financial ultimate regulator in a country to disregard financial risk. It's actually bizarre.
Well, I think that's just because
they believe in a wedge that climate and the environment is a wedge issue with voters. They think that by being anti-climate, that this will gather them lots of right-wing voters that will carry them over the line in the next election. I think this is just monstrous stupidity and insulting the intelligence of the voters.
Yeah,
I'm lost for words. Put it that way.
Well, no, I think it's not that surprising. I mean, you go back to the time before the Bank of England became independent, and as you come near the election, the interest rate policy started shifting. Here you have essentially, as Mark's describing, right? This is the way in which the incumbent government tries to shift the voters into the favor of where they would like to be.
Yeah.
And this is how it is. I think this is one of those things. The other side, I think, from our side, we fear we're more pessimistic than you. I think we have the same aim, which is we really want the fossil fuel to finish absolutely as fast as possible. But I think we rather fear that as long as someone's making a buck out of it, and this, for example, I have this pet gripe now. It's become kind of like a real problem, because every time I talk to someone, I mention it, and people say you mustn't anymore. This crazy city Saudi is building, 170 kilometers long, 200 meters wide, 500 meters tall. And it's basically being financed by us filling cars up. So if there's anything that makes me not want to fill my car up, it's a great disincentive in that way. But I think people are just not really aware in that sense, how the vested interests are benefiting from the existing situations.
Well, talking about vested interest, I recently spoke at the Energy Intelligence Forum. It used to be called the Oil and Money Show. Now it's been renamed. And this was the one at the Intercontinental Hotel a few weeks back in London. And Greta Thunberg was outside with all the, Just Stop Oil protesters and Extinction Rebellion protesting outside. And I had to do the walk of shame past the protesters who thought I was an oil and gas person, which I enjoyed my moment, even though I was being shouted at a lot. I can't see myself as an oil and gas person, even though I've got colleagues at Carbon Tracker who are. But anyway, I went in to do the panel with Exxon and Chevron and Petronas, and to talk to them about the energy transition. I thought it was okay, but actually it allowed me to stick around and listen to the most astonishing speech, best speech. It was from Greg, I think it's Greg Jackson, the CEO of Octopus Renewables, and his opening remarks to the audience. Remember, the audience was like 400 oil and gas executives, particularly from the Middle East and America, had flown in. And he said, we're working with house builders in Scotland, and the offer to the new house builder to the new homeowner is they will never have to pay an energy bill ever again for the rest of their lives. I thought, that's a great opening statement. I looked in the room, people really caught his attention. He said, we put the electric vehicle in the drive. That's 3 days of typical household energy use in your battery. because of course all the devices in the home, whether it's kind of the television or the hair dryer, have become actually a lot more efficient. So energy demand is lower than it used to be. He said, yeah, we draw energy when it's at peak prices and we sell into the grid at high prices, and in return, we give them back the energy at the night time or whenever prices are low and restore the energy. And then they've got air source heat pumps and they may have solar on the roof, and we buy energy off the house or make money from energy off the house. And in return, they never have to pay an energy bill. And he said, the trouble with all of you lot, as in the audience, he says, is that you're still in the mindset of selling something to people that they may never need again for a price that they can't afford. And he said, you remember the days when people paid $20 to download a copy of the Times, and it took you 2 hours because the internet was so slow, and everyone said, no one will ever read the newspaper off the internet. And now we've got a system where consumers consume as much internet on their phone and emails and texts and so on for a fixed flat fee a month. And he said, that's the energy system we're building. We're building a eat as much as you want energy system of cheap, reliable, affordable energy, where it's going to drop down to a low monthly price. And so that's the future we've got to look forward to. And just looking around the room, all the oil and gas executives were kind of like rather lost, because they depend on the world paying a price for their product regardless, and using it regardless of what that price will be. And if oil goes up to $100 a barrel or gas goes up, they shrug their shoulders and say, well, what can we do? And they make money hand over fist.
Yes.
So once you get rid of that commodity demand and replace a commodity market with electrons through the energy grid, through the electric grid, all of that pricing power that the monopoly providers have disappears. So I'm optimistic that will happen, because it's driven by fundamental logic, fundamental economics. If it's cheap and reliable and accessible, people will buy it. And on batteries, people say, well, look how expensive lithium is. Well, I think it was just another FT column yesterday, was it today, about sodium batteries. Yeah. Sodium, what's sodium? I think it's salt, isn't it?
Yeah.
But hugely commonly available. People go, well, there's not enough lithium. Well, how about salt? There's no shortage of salt. So if we can have salt batteries, or we have solid state batteries, we're still evolving the battery technologies, and we could build out a huge energy storage system that works particularly for households and light office buildings and light manufacturing. Maybe we're going to need something different for heavy industrial users, cement and steel and so on, chemicals and so on. But maybe, but we should be able to build a hugely strong, available, cheap, clean energy system, and then extend it around the world, particularly to the global south, so they can leapfrog this fossil fuel phase. So they are making, David, they are making money now. Let's be clear about that. But it's only been a temporary phenomenon. So if you look at the last 10 years of the kind of free cash flow of the oil and gas majors to fund dividends and share buybacks, they've been using debt. They've been borrowing from the banks to fund dividends. And it's only been in the last year and a half with the Ukrainian crisis that they've actually managed to sort of pay back and retire debt and fund dividends from free cash flow. But with oil prices back down again, it's not impossible to think that, and the IEA reckons that EVs will kill 5 million barrels of oil demand a day by 2030. And the last time we saw that during COVID, oil prices went negative. They settled down at $20 a barrel. And if a lot of production requires oil prices to be at $40 a barrel break even, and the market price is 20, that's another way of saying these companies are going to be cash flow negative again. And if they are, what happens to their credit worthiness if the banks refuse to lend, to fund dividends and share buybacks? Now, I think the oil and gas companies could get derated rather quickly, because I think they're only held by the market because of the fat dividends they can fund, but they depend on the banks continuing willingness to lend. And as the market moves away because of EVs and lower forecast gas demand because of renewables, you could see the whole sector derated because the market lose confidence in its ability to make money.
That would no doubt hurt the private sector oil companies extensively. And, you know, we have a number of very large listed oil companies, but still significant, if not majority amount of oil production sits in various state-funded enterprises, whose states' well-being, like you said earlier, basically depend on oil revenues. And there, the mathematics looks very different in their ability to continue to produce.
The Middle Eastern states are obviously some of the world's cheapest producers, and they'll be last man standing, like the Saudis being a good example of that. But they still need, I mean, the thing is, Saudi requires the oil price to be at $70 a barrel to meet their own budget spending to cover education and health, and energy is virtually free there. So they do need a high oil price. And in fact, you know, OPEC has announced 6 or 7 production cuts to keep prices up. That magical formula. But all high prices do is incentivize the world to move away from using high price commodities. So they're kind of stuck, you know. They can't keep the prices high if they want to compete, but they need prices to stay high to fund their deficit. So they keep prices high, and that just drives consumers away to EVs. And, you know, in China, when you can get the list price of an electric car, basic standard model, down to $5,000–6,000 a unit, and if they start exporting those cars into Europe, and supposing they hit the market at $20,000 a unit, when internal combustion engine is selling at 30, and then you've got if you can power it yourself, or use a great company like Octopus Renewables that powers it when it's cheaply available, your electricity bill for your car is going to come in way lower than your petrol bill. And so this is the logic of technology, just growing exponentially, getting cheaper, becoming more reliable. More people will buy it as it gets cheaper, and the more people that buy it, it becomes cheaper still. And this is the wonderful joy of this new clean energy system that's being built around us. Carbon Tracker, we've just published a study around EVs and the Global South, where we calculate that the Global South will save $100 billion a year by switching to EVs, because it will displace oil imports. And so many poor countries are having to spend their coffee dollars or their cocoa dollars or whatever they're exporting to gather the dollars to pay for their oil imports. Now you can see the benefit of what will happen if an importing country doesn't need to import oil in quite the same way. You know, you could see some producer countries of agricultural commodities see their currencies appreciating, because they're not having to sell those commodities to buy dollars. So you can see that will be a benefit to a lot of the Global South, from making their agricultural products
I think
world
revenue point of view.
I think the issue in some ways is this part where, you know, our energy demand versus the growth in renewable energy pace, which one comes higher, and so on. And you have this thing back from sort of the 18th century about Gibbon's paradox, that as we get more efficient, we get more demand. And, you know, in the case in Norway, they're using their plentiful renewable energy to electrify their oil extraction, as instead of displacing, you know, their neighbors' coal plants, you know, Poland across the Baltic Sea, for example. And so you have this thing where this setup where the demand grows, because you have all these wonderful situations that you described, and they go along, and on the margin, keeping that balance in that shape. You know, how do you actually think that's going to arise? Is there any, would it naturally keep pace in that sense, that you can get the renewable experience? You know, China and the solar panel, for example, this article this week about how, you know, even wind turbine technology is now becoming one of the strategic technologies that the US is considering refusing to share. You know, the conflict between China and the US is probably the most dominant thing if Trump gets in, more than about, you know, Paris itself, because this part where even under Biden, we don't want Chinese solar panels, you know, even though they make 90% of the world's solar panels. This part where but we do have that demand, and there's that sort of practical politics that goes along. So on one side, you have higher demand, and the more renewable you do, the more you generate your demand. And
yeah, so I mean, in Europe, you've got solar leapfrogging above other fossil fuel sources will be the biggest single contributor as an energy type within a few years, and has already leapfrogged above other energy types. And if that continues, and around the world, you will see real demand destruction for fossil fuels. That's the key message that people should see and have. Is look at the graphs on how fast is being deployed, and the deployment rates are deploying faster than even the IEA, who've recently kind of been much more positive on this. So I'm confident that so long as banks don't stop lending to project debt and don't make it unaffordable, that we'll see continued growth in clean energy installation around the world. We just got to make it cheap to do it in the global south as well. Mm-hmm. So I see your point that, yeah, I understand the point you're making, but I would just counter and say, well, actually, I think that we're seeing exponential growth in deployment, in technology costs reductions, and that will lead to further growth. And we'll know, I think we'll know by 2030, here we are in 2023, we'll know by 2030 whether we're bending the emissions curve down steeply enough. I don't think we will bend it down steeply enough, but we should be able to bend it down steep enough to notice that people will realize that actually one system is ending and a new system is being built, and they've got to choose which of the two they want to, be part of.
Yeah, that choice I think is really quite important. That aspect where, can the consumer can they actually see themselves as being able to have that choice available? Translating, I think another person that we've been talking to described it as, how do you make it so that people can choose easily the better choice?
Yeah, that's the number one thing. But consumers are smart, and they will find a way of getting what they want at the cheapest price. And they will find a way to do it. And that is what we've got to do with the clean energy system, make it easily accessible, easy to understand. I mean, even simple things like building new houses with your renewable energy system there, not retrofitted afterwards. And then instead of the upfront cost of an air source heat pump or a solar panel, which can be very expensive and certainly beyond the range of what you might call the average citizen.
Yeah.
The governments could play the role, or the markets could play the role by providing 20-year finance smoothed over a long period, and maybe even installing the equipment with a zero upfront cost, and you just pay back over a long time period. I think the only country that's really taken air source heat pumps very seriously is France, where you're seeing something like 500,000 units being sold. Whereas in the UK, I mean, I'd be surprised if we get 30,000 units sold. But we need government support and initiative for rapid scaling up and deployment. So it's to be seen whether, if there is a new government in the UK, and if it turns out to be a Labour government, you just have to hope that they would step up to the plate. But they've been, for fiscal prudence and all that kind of stuff, not to spend the 28 billion. But what people are not understanding is that 28 billion is not it's not expenditure, it's investment. It's investment with a return. And so people should think of it, actually the point of the investment is to create something better, cheaper, more reliable, to replace something that is old, that will, the new one will replace it. So it's investment. It's not lunatic economics, which is kind of the suggestion of the current.
Well, I think that touches on other points which maybe I'm singularly out there in saying that I see basically people don't believe in climate change, even the activists and so on, because the way they behave and everything presumes, the next year and the year after, the decade after and so on is going to be exactly the same as now. And the whole essence of it is not, which I think is your point about the investment. because it's not going to be the same, you actually need to, I think of it even more strongly, that investment is actually a necessary spending. It's like maintaining your house. In that sense. How do you think about whether people actually do see climate change as saying next year is not the same? There was a Question Time, the radio show in the UK, where they asked people about, what would your policy be, 50 years from now? They came back. I think the show switches from city to city, and the last time it was at that place, it was 50 years ago. And all the answers were essentially saying, today's policy just reiterated without any kind of suggestion that the future date might in any way be different, because our world will be different.
I think that humans as a species, we're very good at making decisions about things that affect us today in the here and now. Do I make myself a cup of tea? Do I eat a chocolate biscuit with it?
Do I run away from the lion?
Do I run away from the lion? Yeah, exactly. Or how do I stop myself being hit over the head with a club by my next door neighbour? If you go back to the Neanderthals or whatever.
Yes.
Those are the decisions which humans are taught to make. As through human history, that's the species that we are. We're not so good at saying in 20 years' time, this is where I want to be. This is the world I want to have, and we just are hopeless at making decisions today to ensure that thing that we want, that desire that we have for 20 years' time, that we create the conditions where we arrive at. And that's the kind of the nature of the climate change problem. People say, well, I can't see it. Why am I worrying about it? Or as one relative said to me, I think 2 degrees, 3 degrees extra warming sounds rather nice, Mark.
Yeah.
They thought we're going from 18 degrees Celsius to 22, and it'll make for so much nicer, warmer summer. And I hadn't quite understood that this was a global average mean temperature, and you've got extremes at the Arctic and the Antarctic, and it's an averaging out, and that actually this is not something you've seen for millions of years. And the last time it was +4 or +3, the UK was populated with rhinoceroses and gazelles, and it was a savanna, hot swamp. So instead people, do you like it quite like it is now, or would you prefer a hot, steamy swamp where you can only spend 2 hours a day outdoors? Which of the two would you choose? I don't think we're very good at understanding those choices, really.
No, we're not.
So
not at all.
From an investor point of view, there's a very well-known British scientist who spoke at a conference at one of the big universities in the UK, and his opening talk to a meeting of chief investment officers of large pension schemes. His opening remarks were, "I hope you figured out how much it's going to cost to refreeze the Arctic." They're all looking around like, what's he talking about? And they say, yeah, well, it's going to cost you trillions and trillions of dollars to refreeze the Arctic. But I hope you figured out how to do it, because we're melting it. And all those portfolios you built for yourself and your pension funds in all the major cities, think again about what they're going to be worth. And so he was kind of trying to, the electric, when you sort of give somebody an electric jolt, make them wake up, and actually say, you might not be able to see it now, but we're going through, I think, David, you understand this very well, tipping points. These tipping points could tip us in from an existing system into a completely different system. And that different system could be different for not 5 years, it could be different for 10,000 years. And we're close to those tipping points as a consequence of our inability to act and deal with the climate crisis fast enough. And politicians, whether it's Trump or whoever it might be, who try and slow this down, in fact, want to go in the other direction, they just haven't a clue. But anyway, they're the last ones to want to listen to science.
I get that very much. Richard, I'm going to have to hop out. I wanted to say one last thing, which is, I realized about one way I've come to understand about the world going up, 1.5 degrees is imagine body temperature is 37.5 roughly, 36.4. 1.5 degrees, you're into 38 degrees. You don't feel well, your colleagues are telling you to go home at that point, basically.
Yeah.
And at 2 degrees, you are shivering, feeling freezing cold, but you're kind of boiling hot in your core. And what's happening when that happens to the whole planet with everybody is when you go and look for the doctor and the nurses, they are feeling the same too. And that's what's going to happen. It's not the nice, oh, well, it'll be 22 degrees. That's not it. Everything starts collapsing, just the same as you would be at that point. But anyway, it's really, really enjoyable talking with you. I'd love to catch up another time more about these things. I'm afraid I need to.
Thank you. And let's do a review of the COP.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be a great idea. Here we've had Mark Campanale, the founder of Carbon Tracker, with us for a very, very enlightening and interesting discussion. Great thanks to you, Mark, for stepping up to the plate and being here. We loved having you here.
Thank you, Richard and David. It's been a pleasure.
And that was Mark Campanale, and some very sobering things said about that. And I think it's fair remembering, if you look in the news today, that Venezuela had a referendum to take over a major part of its neighboring country, Guyana. And the reason for that is because in this particular part of Guyana that they want to take over, there have been major oil and gas discoveries. So we still live in a world where countries want to take over each other in order to benefit from oil and gas and coal. And that's why we actually need capital markets to be able to step up and make it possible for people to create a market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. Because at the end of the day, we are the agents. It's our money that we spend, which collectively produces the economy, which actually allows the governments to continue to function in the way that they do. So we actually hold that fundamental power, and it is in our hands to do that. So I want to close by playing that call we had earlier about how we can be the ones to do this, to create the market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. Please bear that in mind. Please just think that actually you can do this. It is entirely in our power.
This is basically where we grow all our food today. As our temperature rises and the soil where we grow our food loses its ability to retain water. This is a recipe for massive geopolitical conflict. It was a massive wake-up call for me and David. And it was really the start of how we thought about what could be done.
And of course, a lot of these regions are actually not growing crops for food. They're growing crops for sustainable plastic, for sustainable fuel. So it influences our economy in a very fundamental way. Coming from an investment background and having had 30 years making money for big money, we've come to realize that if you've got something which isn't working, you have to do something about it. And what isn't working at the moment is the reduction in the oil and the gas and the coal production that we have. And to the story of the fact that we can triple our renewable energy by 2030, even when we do that, we would still be increasing our oil and gas and coal production if our energy demand just continues on this path. Having come to that conclusion, we then start on thinking, how can we actually change this? And that's why It's For You came out. And the problem is an economic one. Are people going to pay in order to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? And that's one of the challenges that we faced. And we spoke to many people. The problem, they say, is people don't care. So we then thought we'll find out with It's For You. And we went and we heard many of the stories in the past 6 days. And they have been emotional. They have been really moving. And we have had this aspect where the reflections have brought us to ask, what do we really want? Do we really want to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? Do we really want to think that actually our projects to regenerate and to heal the planet and to bring about a better equality, a better dignity to every person there, do we really want that to be supported by oil, gas, and coal being kept in the ground? We came across a remarkable gentleman, Preston, who actually has a business that does that. And here he is talking a little bit about how he does it.
So I think there is a hesitancy to pay for what you and Richard and all of us are working on here, which is to really go after the ownership of the minerals.
Yeah.
Because I think unless you live here in the United States, it's really government-owned minerals. And it seems kind of like an audacious task to go after purchasing or getting some sort of an operating agreement with the government for control of those minerals. Here in the U.S., obviously, roughly 66% of the minerals are owned by people other than the U.S. government, so it makes it a lot easier. But the next step is, okay, so we're going to buy these minerals, David and Richard, so how do we actually have a return on our investment? And so I think there's an unfamiliarity, or well, there's beginning to be a familiarity, is that, wait, you can make carbon offsets out of these things? But then they immediately come back and say, well, you're going to have 100% leakage because you're going to take your coal out and then they're just going to mine it someplace else. And, that's an argument that everyone throws out because it's just I don't want to do it, so it's leakage.
And indeed, this leakage problem, right? And it becomes a rationalization in some ways. There are those that says it will just finish. There is only so much oil and gas and coal, and by the time we finish the transition, they'll just run out. And Preston again had this to say about that.
And then the other argument that I run into is that people don't understand is, I'm going to use fake numbers just for simple math for Richard and David and I. Let's just say we have in the United States 100 million tons of active mining projects at any given time today. Okay, so let's just say we're mining 20 million tons a year. So it'd be 100, 80, 60, 40, 20, 0. Okay, but the reality is, no, it's 100. Last year was 100, and next year is 100. Well, why is that? Because we're adding reserves on a daily basis to make up for that we're removing.
And there you go. And Richard, maybe you can explain also why this aspect where the renewable energy becoming cheaper is also not going to make the change.
Well, this is a real area of controversy. And today, wind, solar, and hydro power is very, very competitive. Its marginal cost is below a lot of fossil fuel production. Certainly, the marginal oil field, which at the moment is basically fracking in the US, potential deep water drilling in various Atlantic shelves, or tar sands in Canada, are significantly more expensive than the marginal cost of renewable energy. But I remain somewhat skeptical for a simple fact. There is no stopping the production of these more expensive fields if there is still demand for that energy. So even if the renewable energy producer might be able to turn a profit of $10 per whatever unit they produce, we will still mine coal and we will still drill a hole in the ground or in the sea pumping oil, even if we can only make $1. Because as long as someone somewhere can turn even a minuscule profit, it will be produced. And if it is produced, it will be consumed. So I remain skeptical about the story that only the cost of renewables will manage to displace traditional oil, gas, and coal fields.
So that brings on this conundrum in some sense, is really down to the owners of these assets, of these minerals. And what would the owners want to do? And the owners can get compensated for owning them and not taking them out. So you can imagine someone starting with that. But the people to compensate them are the people who need the carbon offsets, if they're treated as carbon offsets. But that will only go at a certain pace. But I think we need to move much faster than that, which is what people are talking about. And of course, in many ways, our elections have to deal with each election cycle, whereas our climate devastations are really dealing with a time that is measured in a very different way. So where does that leave Richard and me, and where does that leave you? And this is being for you. It leaves us with this sense that we need to create a very different sort of a market. And here it is. And we need to be able to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. So imagine this. Imagine that you're about to go and propose and get married, and you're there going to looking for your wedding rings. And you're doing this because you have this wonderful vision of wanting to share a future, even if it is uncertain, that you want to have this journey together for that future. What better way than doing that than to know that somehow, in one form or another, a fraction of the money you pay for that special wedding ring goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And in doing that, in having something like this, it lets everybody see that this is the thing to do, simply that. And imagine if you're an employer and you want to motivate your employee and you want to give him a pay rise. What better way to really motivate him than to be able to say to him, look, I will match your pay rise to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And if you can do that, then your employee will feel, actually, you know what, I am working for, even in whatever work I'm doing, I'm looking after our common home. And I'm creating a better future for my children and for all the people around me. And that itself can be quite motivating. And Richard, what about you? What do you think about going to a Taylor Swift concert? How would you think of a fraction of that ticket? Because you go to music concerts all the time.
I think it fits very, very well into the overall picture of saying, when I spend my money, I'm going to spend it with those who I think make my life better. Now let's think about that for a second. I want to direct that spending towards those who make my life better. If I am worried about the future, and I certainly am, then I want the recipients of the money I spend on goods and services to actually be committed to taking oil, gas, and coal out of production and keeping it in the ground. So if I'm prepared to spend $100 on an artist I do want to go and see, it's reasonable that a couple of dollars on that ticket gets redirected towards keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And that applies to all goods and services I can think of. And the mathematics is actually very, very simple. Every business needs its clients and customers, because otherwise you won't remain in business. And all governments need businesses, because otherwise they will not be able to raise revenue and provide the services that the citizens demand from them. So when all that fits together, and given that our economic model is based on us continuing to consume and spend money on these goods and services, we actually have enormous power as consumers of the world to opt to spend our dollar in the pocket with those companies who are committed to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
And the essence is, by investors knowing that there is such a market, that there is such an interest to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground through our spending. And as far as government is concerned, what this does is it actually increases our spending, and that's a good thing for our overall economy. But in doing it in a way that actually helps all the regeneration and the healing we need for our planet. Because it's spending that actually goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, as opposed to extracting more of it out to harm and poison our planet and all on it in that form. So this becomes a turning over, flipping of the table, and a new way of actually creating an economy, creating a market that actually moves everything forward, allowing people that choice for them to be able to say, you know what, the money I spend, I can choose who to direct it to. And if I see these people and they are part of the group who are redirecting it to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, investors will be able to come in and will be able to say, you know what, these assets, they're worth buying to keep in the ground because I can be paid on one side in terms of carbon credits. And that generally is associated with the production that's ongoing. And that can come on through by saying, you know what, we'll match it to the renewable energy that's being produced, so that we can match and keep making sure that we have the energy we need. And then on the other side, you can keep those reserves down and start eating away on those reserves, so that out of the 100 million tons, and we take out 20, and then we take out another 20, we genuinely will see that there is only 60 left, and then only 40 left. And in that way, the whole change, the innovations and the creativity would come along and say, how can we move and actually help ourselves to go forward? And that's where technology gets the backing into the fall, into moving everything together. And so it both liberates us and frees us from this tyranny of the climate. So that's our call, to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, to be able to express our wish that a fraction of the money we spend goes into keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
Indeed. It actually is that simple. We need to create this market for people to see the true cost of the use of oil, gas, and coal, and for us to actually find an economic way of leaving it in the ground.
Well, that's it. And we're going to finish that part. And thank you very much, everybody, for being with us over tonight. And please remember, we can do this. We can not only point ourselves in the right way to look after our common home and help each other along and find our own pace in going forward and being together with that migration, which has already started and it is actually going on. But we can actually speed it up and accelerate it and help Mark in his ambitions and all of us in our desires in achieving what we want by creating a market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And I'll finish with that tonight. Thank you for being with me and have a good night. Good evening. Bye-bye.